alarm test. So please head out of the main door through which you came, turn to your right and assemble down in front of the cathedral. Toilets are out to the left and the right, down the stairs. We will be taking a break after the first application for 10 minutes. We've got 4 applications today, so it's likely to be a reasonably long meeting, but I trust that members will keep their comments to necessary and incisive points they're going to make. Do we have any apologies for absence? We do. Councillor Bartle.
Yes, I'm substituting for Councillor O'Rourke.
Okay, so apologies from Councillor O'Rourke, and Councillor Bartle is substituting. And that, I believe, looks like everybody. Declarations of interest on these applications. Does anybody have any declarations of interest? No? Minutes of the previous meeting. Are you happy for me to sign those as a record, or do you have anything you would like to raise? No, that looks okay. Action sheet. Anything on the action sheet that anyone wishes to raise? No. And so over to appeals, I believe. Would you give us a report on the appeals, Simone, and where we are with them? And I'd welcome any councillors who've got questions about any particular appeals. Simone will be happy to answer those after she's just highlighted some things that she feels are important to.
Actually, I wasn't going to highlight any particular
Well,
case. I was just going
showcase
to
the work of your.
I think we are content, or certainly fairly pleased that most of the appeals we are defending, so that most of them are being dismissed. We've also noticed that there has been a reduction in the number of non-determination appeals that we're getting, which is of course good. And otherwise not much to say unless there's anything specific anybody wanted to know.
Good, that's excellent. Anything from anyone? Nope. Great. Okay. Then, thank you very much. Sorry? Oh, we have the enforcement down as item 8 after the public forum, interestingly enough. I think that's where it normally is. We will take enforcement now, despite it being different in different places, according to which agenda you've got. Simone, would you like to lead us through enforcement cases, highlighting the work of the...
Well, there haven't been any notices issued recently, but there is an update provided on the on our overall effort in improving also the services in the enforcement team, which, as you may recall, we have previously also reported that we have first prioritised getting development management service into much better shape, and then as of last September, we've put more resource into enforcement as well, and now starting to catch up and improve services there as well. The important thing to note as well, as much as possible, we will always try and resolve an enforcement situation first via negotiation or other means, or if it's appropriate for an application to come forward. And therefore, enforcement notices are often only the last step, and that is a key reason why you don't see any there, but actually there's been a lot of action. If you scroll down to the number of cases dealt with, there have still been lots of cases being dealt with.
Thank you. So an improving situation, and we've got some training for members coming up on enforcement as well, which obviously encourage everyone to attend. Any questions on enforcement, particular enforcement actions going on or not going on? No? That's great.
May I just add, the training next week or briefing on enforcement, that's actually open to all members. That's not just planning committee members, but all members. So please spread the word. We would be keen for a high attendance at that event.
Yeah, it's the thing that does come up generally amongst people who are not on planning committees, and so I think as leads we probably need to push that round a little bit to make sure that people have a basic understanding, and then there are less questions come as individual questions to officers in the future. It just helps to reduce the email traffic, I think, if people understand how things work basically. Thank you. Okay, public forum now. We've got 3 general questions. Mr. Joe Banks is here, I believe. Joe, would you like to ask your question, please?
Thanks very much for your answers, and it's good to see that you say you're going to publish more detail about the process of delegation, because it doesn't seem to be very clear to the public at the moment. And my question is, you said that when officers consider that a planning application has particular significance for the development of Bristol, but it hasn't been called in by a councillor, then it goes to the agenda meeting of the two chairs of the 2 committees, who then decide whether or not it goes to a DC meeting, or whether it's determined through the delegated authority of the officers. And my question is, do the two chairs, the 2 party leads, have to agree to say that yes, it should go to the committee, or no, it doesn't need to, it can be a delegated decision?
So you've slightly misunderstood the answer that we've given, because it doesn't go to both agenda setting meetings, but it goes to the next one available, because the committees alternate, so it always goes to the next available one, and it's the party leads at that agenda setting meeting who make the decision.
So it's made by a single councillor?
No, by the 4 party leads,
Right.
who are at that agenda setting meeting.
And they have to be in agreement?
No, it's a majority decision. But I would say most of the time they do agree.
Thank you.
We try to agree. Thank you. Councillor Hornchen's not here, I don't think, and Anonymous, I presume, is not present. Okay, that takes us on then to our first application, which is the Gallery Shopping Centre, Broadmead, and we have a number of public forum submissions. I will ask if I suspect Mr. Tim James is not here, but is Mr. Tim James here just in case? No. Max Freed? Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. As a local business, Dealey Freed is extremely proud to have worked on this hugely significant proposal, which we feel is critical to unlocking the council's plans to regenerate the city centre. The Galleries has been struggling since well before the pandemic. Poorly designed, with car parking covering 40% of the site, it has long been obsolete. Our proposal would completely transform the site, with more than 5,000 people living and working here, bringing life and spending 24/7, delivering 450 homes, 20% of which will be affordable. It will still have shops and restaurants at ground floor throughout the development, including units facing outwards to Castle Park and Broadmead. 1/3 of the site area will become fully accessible public realm, with new, safe, green routes running through the site, with the road between Galleries and Castle Park, that's Newgate, becoming pedestrianised. Please support our proposal to kickstart Bristol City Centre's regeneration plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stephen Taylor?
Good evening, councillors. This application is the culmination of a meticulous and collaborative 4-year design journey. As director of Bristol-based architect AHMM, I'm extremely proud of the design. This scheme will reuse, reinvent and reinvigorate the Galleries as a vibrant mixed-use development in the heart of our city. The application as outlined we have worked with your design consultants to agree an extremely thorough 170-page design code to ensure the quality of design through subsequent detailed applications. All buildings and public open space must meet these finely tuned rules, particularly important for ensuring the quality of the more prominent, taller buildings. The homes meet national space standards. Everyone will get private and shared amenity. There are no north aspect homes, at least 55% dual aspect, and a range of homes including 3 beds. This scheme is best in class, designed for shopping, living, working, leisure, visiting and relaxation. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine McPherson.
Good evening, councillors. Our team at Horley is responsible for the outstanding sustainability credentials of the gallery's proposal. From the outset, our client pushed us to go beyond policy and compliance. I firmly believe that we are setting a new standard for sustainability in Bristol and the UK. We are reusing the existing basement and foundations, saving 13,000 tonnes of carbon emissions, the equivalent to the annual energy consumption of around 4,000 homes. Once occupied, the development will achieve over 40% reduction in emissions, double the savings compared to your own policy. This will be achieved partly by connecting to the Bristol heat network and through extensive rooftop solar panels. The redevelopment will also house its own energy centre, supplying heat for other developments across the city. I'm really proud that we are contributing to this development and can't wait to deliver this vibrant, sustainable future for our community.
Thank you. Charlotte Birchall.
Good evening, councillors. Our client has worked closely with council officers and the NHS to ensure Broadmead Medical Centre, currently located within the galleries, can continue to provide care to its existing patients. A range of options were presented to the NHS, including keeping the existing surgery building open throughout the redevelopment. The NHS has confirmed its preference is to relocate to another Broadmead site. Your officers have concluded that a financial contribution of nearly £1.4 million is appropriate towards the cost of that relocation. This substantial sum demonstrates our client's support for our much-loved NHS. Our client has been able to agree to this sum without reducing the level of affordable housing, which remains at 20%. At a time when so many developments are stalling as construction and borrowing costs spiral, the fact that this proposal seeks to fund both healthcare and affordable housing is to be extremely welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed Cheney? Not here, I believe. I think not here. Bristol Civic Society. Sorry. Could you give us a name, please, madam?
Yes, sure. Good evening. Sandra Fryer here, the Chair of Bristol Civic Society.
Thank you.
I welcome this brief opportunity to talk to you. We're on record as objecting to the scheme, but that's really because we see how important this scheme is to the regeneration and growth of the city centre. And our key concerns, some as shared with Historic England, are of the heritage impact on the old city and the co-location of the tall building, which we had hoped to see on a slightly different point on the site. I want to take a quick moment to say, please, City Council, publish a tall building policy so we can see how we're going on that journey together. We welcome on this scheme 450 new homes, maybe more than 20% could actually be affordable. We would prefer not to see any student accommodation and perhaps another, say, 300 more new homes. And if approved today, I just want to remind members, you would be approving the block, the massing and the height. And I therefore think it's really important, well, we think it's really important that you're clear on the controls to make sure this scheme is delivered in phases and is completed. So Civic Society will be very pleased to work with you on this. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Shabalala.
Thank you, Chair. Myself and co-councillor Annie really are quite supportive of this scheme. Not only is the scheme quite important and has met all the core things around the city centre, it's actually supporting us meet the vision of a Broadmead redevelopment, which is really core to the city centre regeneration. One of the great features that we've actually enjoyed is working with the team in terms of meeting with them, understanding what they want to do with the public realm, their contributions towards SIL, their authentic approach towards social value, and even the work that they've done to support the reallocation of the NHS kind of service, and not only just providing space, but also providing financial incentive through Section 106, which is something that could go to other uses, but instead it's been quite core that they can also put priority in doing that. And I think that's really, really, really important to stress. Broadmead in itself has faced many changes, also the businesses within that area. Such updates not only support residents, but also support the business and the vibrancy of the city. And I think that's really something that we need to put core in the decision that's being made today. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Simon Cox. Sorry, did I miss Simon Cox? I apologise. I don't know how that happened.
Good evening, councillors.
I do apologise. I did, in fact.
I'm the applicant's heritage advisor. Over a 4-year period, we've worked closely with the applicant's team, the council's advisors, and Historic England, who have commended the sensitive approach taken to the site's historic context. Importantly, Historic England does not object. The proposals have been thoughtfully designed to celebrate the city's heritage and, where possible, to enhance appreciation of cultural heritage assets such as the Merchants Taylors Arms Houses and the Greyhound Hotel listed buildings. The design team proposes to retain and celebrate both buildings, including new public realm around the arms houses. Effects upon the settings of cultural heritage assets are inevitable, but the proposals have been designed to ensure that these are either positive or to eliminate or minimise harm. As a heritage professional, I also welcome the design codes, which the architect mentioned. Historic England contributed to those codes, which will ensure all new buildings are sensitive to their historic context. Thank you.
Thank you. Well worth waiting for, and I apologise again. Over now to Simone for the presentation. Just to note, this is a hybrid application, worth bearing in mind for those who... perhaps you could open with explaining, Simone, what that...
It's actually John who's giving the presentation.
John's doing the presentation. I do apologise again. It's not my day, is it? I got a cold. That's my excuse.
Maybe just to say as well, because this is such a complex application, we've taken the liberty of making it slightly longer than normal.
Okay.
I'll start briefly just by explaining the format of the hybrid application. So the hybrid application has been submitted. It comprises 2 parts. The first part comprises the full application, which relates to the demolition of the existing gallery shopping centre and the multi-storey car park down to ground floor level. It would also include the firm design of the Fairfax Street, as well as change of uses to the basement area for flexible leisure, as well as ancillary uses which relate to the upper floor development blocks, which will be covered under the outline. Additionally as well, it covers the change of use of the Merchant Taylors almshouses to community and cultural uses. The outline that has been submitted with all matters reserved relates to a comprehensive redevelopment of the site, and that would comprise 7 development blocks, and that would include uses which would include but are not limited to residential development, student accommodation, office-based development, ground floor retail, food and beverage across each of the development blocks, as well as the community and cultural use as well, which is covered under the full. So that is the nature of the hybrid application. That in turn would be the detailed design would come forward as reserved matters application, and that's what's being referred to as the detailed design. Okay. With that, I'll make a start on the presentation. Yeah.
on that screen there, John, to
Oh.
vacancy.
Okay, so I was looking for these screens. Yeah, so yeah, first of all, evening everyone. The application before you this evening is the hybrid application for the galleries redevelopment in Broadmead, central Bristol. The application site comprises the existing gallery shopping centre, multi-storey car park in various retail units fronting onto Broadmead along its northern boundary. Opened in 1991, the galleries has been a retail unit within Bristol city centre since. However, today it is a commercially struggling retail asset with a growing number of vacancy rates. The site is bound by Broadmead to the north, Merchant Street to the east, Newgate to the south, and Union Street to the west, as well as Fairfax Street, which traverses the site below the gallery shopping centre itself. There are various... Sorry, is that any better? Yeah, that's fine. All right. So there are various heritage assets on site and off site. However, these will be covered in the following slides. Castle Park is located to the immediate south of the site, and the River Avon 120 metres to the south as well. A culverted section of the River Froome follows the broad alignment of Fairfax Street as well. So going into those heritage assets, there are three listed buildings on site. There's the Merchant Taylors Almshouses to the eastern boundary. This covers the almshouses as well as the associated railings. These are Grade 2 star listed. The Greyhound Hotel is located to the northern boundary. This is a Grade 2 listed building. It's a former coaching inn. This is much altered over time. There are various listed buildings off-site, including St Peter's Church, directly to the south of Union Street, as well as Quakers Friars to the east, as well as the John Wesley's New Room and Arcade to the north. There are various locally listed buildings as well. There's two, in fact. That includes the hub to the northeast of the site, as well as the Odeon, which is located on Union Street to the west. The applicant has undertaken significant pre-application since June 2020. This has included 2 pre-application submissions as well as 2 public consultations. Significant engagement has been undertaken with internal and external organisations which have influenced the design. This has included approximately 33 meetings with the BCC Planning Department, 10 with the BCC DDP team, 4 meetings and reviews with Design West, as well as 4 meetings with Historic England prior to submission. The pre-application has significantly influenced the design with reductions in height, scale and massing, as well as the relocation of the tallest elements of the scheme from the east to the west and reductions of height of 10 stories. So, as discussed, the application has been submitted in hybrid form. This includes the full application for the full permission, which includes the demolition of the galleries and the multi-storey car park, as well as the detailed highways layout for Fairfax Street, as well as the change of use of the basement for flexible leisure, as well as ancillary uses to support the outline elements above. This also includes the changes of uses of the Merchant Taylors Almshouses. The outline, as we discussed, will include development blocks at ground level, and this will include uses such as residential student accommodation, office, retail, food and beverage across the ground floor, as well as others. The outline will subsequently be followed by reserved matters applications, which will detail the detailed design, and that will be governed by the design code and the parameter plans, which have been developed by the applicant in consultation and have followed various iterations, taking on board various stakeholders' influences. The application itself does constitute EIA development and is supported by an environmental statement and supporting documents. The council has had due regard to all of the environmental statement documents in the assessment of this application. So, a design code has been submitted as cited within the public forum statement. This is a comprehensive document which details the rules and requirements for the outline permission and will govern the reserve matters applications. This covers various items such as the public realm widths, building lines, building materials and facade requirements, building separation widths, public realm requirements such as street furniture, landscaping, wayfinding and lighting, the public hub design and management measures, the building heights and roof mounted plant design, and the residential amenity requirements across each of the residential block. In assessing the design code, officers consider that the design code provides clarity and certainty on the detailed design requirements and will achieve high quality and coherent design across the multiple phases which may come forward. In addition to the design code, there are a series of parameter plans. These outline the parameters in which the reserve matters will need to accord with. These include such measures such as maximum building heights, the public realm widths, vehicle access and servicing requirements, site levels and the predominant land uses, and the landscaping features and requirements. Parameter plans have been revised based on the consultee comments and they do accord with the design code requirements. Officers do consider that these are acceptable as they've been submitted and detail the necessary design quality for future detailed design. In addition to the parameter plans, there are a series of illustrative plans and elevations which have been submitted by the applicant. This demonstrates a way in which the development may feasibly come forward in accordance with the design code and the parameter plans. However, members are reminded that these are illustrative in nature. They are to demonstrate how it could come forward and they're not for approval. So, the application site does demonstrate multiple layers. This includes the retained basement of the galleries, which is obviously at ground floor, below ground floor level. Fairfax Street, which traverses the site from west to east, and a split ground floor level in which would comprise development blocks. Retail, food and beverage would be at each of the development block ground floor levels. However, to provide context on the other uses, Block A to the southwest corner of Union Street and Newgate would include residential. Block B to the northwest corner would include student accommodation. Block C would be the retained Grade 2 listed Greyhound Hotel. This would be retail, food and beverage. Block D would be to the northeast, and this would comprise office-based development. Grade E is the retained Grade 2 star listed Merchant Taylor's Almshouse. This would be inclusive of the change of use for the community and cultural uses. Block F to the southeast corner would comprise office development, and Block G is referred to as a swing block. Now, this relates to a potential for different uses, which include residential, office, hotel, and service department uses. The site would also include a public hub, which would be split across the Fairfax Street level, providing access to the upper floor levels also. This provides a centralised area for cycle parking, changing facilities, and allows the wider active travel connections to the site. So, development composition. To confirm, this is an illustrative demonstration of how the development could be brought forward. It shows how it could feasibly be brought forward, however, is not for approval. So, Block A, as I said, is for residential. B, student accommodation. C, the retained arcade to the rear of the Greyhound Hotel. D is office. E would be the retained Greyhound Hotel. Sorry, not Greyhound Hotel, sorry. The Merchant Taylor's Almshouses. And F being office, and G, the swing block. A revised floor schedule was submitted in December 2024, which increases the minimum requirement for retail, food and beverage, which will be provided across each of the development blocks. It's worth noting that these are figures, the maximum requirement of floor space provided across development blocks. This is a maximum, and therefore the detailed design will not be permitted to exceed these figures. Additionally, the detailed design will not be allowed to go below the minimum 6,000 square metres for retail, food and beverage. Illustrative phasing plans have been submitted to BCC in support of the application. These demonstrate a way in which the development could be brought forward. A condition has been added to the decision, which will require further phasing plans to be submitted. These will ensure that the level of disruption is managed during construction and demolition. So, significant consultation has been undertaken throughout the determination of this planning application. In total, 382 neighbour notification letters were sent to local residents around the application site. In total, 26 consultation responses were received. Broken down, this is 19 objections, 3 neutral and 4 supporting. Some of the key themes that were expressed by the public included the loss of retail and business within the city centre, additional strain on healthcare facilities, the scale, form and height of the proposed development, concerns relating to heritage harm and Castle Park, microclimate impacts and carbon emissions, as well as over-concentration of student populations and unacceptable traffic and transport impacts. Significant engagement was undertaken with amenity groups, internal consultees and external consultees. As noted on screen, this is a list of all of the consultees in which we've received responses from throughout the determination of this application. Consultation did include amenity groups, internal and external consultees. Members' attention is particularly drawn to some of the pertinent consultee responses as listed below. These are detailed in greater detail within the committee report, which was issued last week. So, for a development of this scale, there are a number of policy considerations which need to be assessed. In assessing the application, due regard has been given to each of the policies on screen. I will not go through all of them for obvious reasons. So, the application proposals propose a provision of up to 450 residential dwellings. The residential composition, the tenure, size and type will be addressed through the reserve matters. Additionally, there are conditions which will stipulate a residential composition statement to be submitted with the relevant reserve matters application. Proposals positively contribute towards the housing targets outlined within the DDP, as well as the existing and emerging policy contexts. The principle of residential as part of a wider mixed-use development on this site is supported and considered to be acceptable. Proposals would also include 20% affordable housing, up to 90 dwellings. Affordable housing would be provided at 20%, and the tenure would be agreed through a Section 106 agreement. The composition would entail a maximum of 50% one-bedroom dwellings and a minimum of 13% three-bedroom plus. This has been undertaken with the BCC enabling manager. Delivery of affordable housing will be delivered under the Section 106, and the total provided is considered acceptable and policy compliant. The development proposals also include up to 750 student bed spaces. The DDP supports up to 750 bed spaces, as well as policy DM2, in principally allowing or supporting student bed spaces within the city centre. The DDP outlines that student accommodation in areas less preferable for residential would be supported also. The principle and quantum of student accommodation upon the site as part of a wider mix of uses is considered acceptable. The Gallery Shopping Centre is an asset which is commercially underperforming. That is recognised. The proposals have outlined a minimum provision of 6,000 square metres of Class E retail, food and beverage across the ground floor levels, providing activation with the wider public realm. The proposals would allow greater diversity in the daytime and evening economies, broadening activity across Broadmead. This is an issue which has been identified within the DDP as it currently is. BCC Economic Development supports the provision of approximately 39,600 square metres of office space within the city centre. We do note that the development would result in a net reduction in the total retail floor space given the existing nature of the site. However, given the resilience and adaptability of the proposals across the site which would meet local needs, it is considered that a deviation from BCS 7 would be acceptable. As such, we do consider that the development would be acceptable in terms of economic use of land and retail. Sure. We do note the fact that there are a number of heritage assets located on the site. That includes the Merchant Taylor's Almshouses and the Greyhound Hotel, as well as those off-site. In terms of the ES, we do note the fact that the proposals would potentially give rise to less than substantial harm to the Merchant Taylor's Almshouses and Greyhound Hotel, as well as moderate less than substantial harm to St. Peter's Church. No effect is anticipated to Quakers Friars, given the applicant's relocation of the tallest elements of the building to the western edge at the request of Historic England. Under paragraph 213 of the MPPF, we do consider there to be clear and convincing justification for the harm, given the regeneration benefits of the wider scheme. And under paragraph 215 of the MPPF, we do consider there to be clear and demonstrable public benefits which outweigh the harm. This includes the provision of residential student accommodation, adaptable and resilient economic floor space, as well as the wider public benefits and regeneration of the scheme across the site in Broadmead. As such, we do consider the development to be acceptable in terms of heritage. With regard to townscape and visual impacts, the site is located in an area adjacent next to Castle Park. The development would be of a height, scale and massing which would be visible across parts of the city. No significant townscape effects are anticipated during construction with regard to townscape. No significant visual effects are anticipated in terms of visual impacts at construction, with the exception of Fairfax Street and Merchant Street, given the lack of intervening built form between that receptor and the site. With regard to the operational phase, this would be the finished development. Moderate beneficial townscape effects are anticipated in terms of the regeneration and public realm benefits across the scheme, across the site. The applicant does consider moderate adverse effects in terms of height, scale and massing at Broadmead, Castle Park and the City and Queen Square conservation area. The Council's TVI advisor has outlined that these are underestimated. However, they are considered to be acceptable with the benefit of contribution to Castle Park regeneration, enhancement and offsetting within the Castle Park site. As such, we do consider the townscape and visual effects to be acceptable. There are two healthcare facilities located on the site, the Broadmead Medical Centre and the UHBW Eye Hospital. We do not consider the UHBW Eye Hospital to constitute a local primary healthcare facility, given that they do not provide primary healthcare facilities. They also took occupancy of a site within the galleries, within the Gallery Shopping Centre, with full knowledge that the development proposals would be coming forward in 2022. A range of scenarios have been tabled to the ICB. This includes scenario 1, which is the immediate relocation to an off-site premises. Scenario 2 would be the retention of the Broadmead Medical Centre within their existing premises. And then scenario 3 would be the retention of the the Broadmead Medical Centre within temporary accommodation and relocation within an early phase of development. The ICB has not yet committed to any of the above scenarios. However, the BCC has assessed each of the scenarios and consider each of the scenarios to be in compliance with policies DM5 and CF2. By virtue that each of the scenarios is compliant, we do consider the development to be acceptable subject to development contributions, and we will continue to work with the ICB in forming that Section 106. With regard to transport, the public hub would provide enhanced access across the site from Fairfax Street to street level. There would also be enhanced connections and legibility across the site from east to west and north to south. The public realm, as cited as being 33% of the site, is a clear benefit of the scheme opening up the site and wider access to Broadmead and Castle Park. With regard to parking, the development would result in demolition of the multi-storey car park. The development would constitute a car-free development with the exception of blue badge parking at Fairfax Street and also within the basement for residents. However, this would be blue badge parking only. Adequate provision is made within the design code and the parameter plans for servicing and emergency vehicles also. The development would provide the detailed design for Fairfax Street as well as development contributions to the wider CRSTS provision of works at Newgate and Union Street also. We consider the development to be acceptable in transport terms, and this will be subject to wider contributions and conditions as part of the application. With regard to design, there is a clear policy background for height, that being established through the DDP, that amplified heights across the site are acceptable. Additionally, the design code accordance has been demonstrated as an appendice to the design and access statement. We consider the principle of tall buildings across the site to be acceptable. The layout and public realm is a clear benefit of the scheme, providing east-west connections and north-south. Measures within the design code and parameter plans provide clarity that high-quality design will be provided at the reserved matters stage. The design code also provides details on the predominant materials, and we consider these to be acceptable. The development also includes details on building frontages. We consider these to outline a positive and activation with the public realm. Where there is inactive frontages, there will be a requirement for better articulation. Also, this is outlined and stipulated within the design code. So as a result, we believe this does provide certainty and consistency across each of the development phases. The design code and the parameter plans also do provide certainties around the landscaping requirements, and we do consider that this provides certainty as well. On this basis, we believe the design to be acceptable. The plans on screen do demonstrate the illustrative landscaping proposals. This includes a meandering approach up Arcade Lane and Green Street, as well as the east-west connections. The montage at the bottom provides an indication of how the scheme could be brought forward. However, this is not for approval. This is simply as an illustrative purpose. The design code provides certainty around ensuring the residential amenity of future occupants. This includes accordance with the nationally described space standards, as well as preserving adequate distances between development blocks. An assessment of daylight and sunlight has also been undertaken on adjacent and future residential occupants, and this is considered to be acceptable also. The case officer does acknowledge a limited roof space amenity to be provided on Block G, and as such, development contributions are sought in terms of the enhancement to Castle Park, given greater reliance on public open space. The design code does provide clarity that residential amenity would be safeguarded across each of the phases of development. The site does contain 28 trees. 2 would be lost as part of the development at Merchant Street. This would be there would be a requirement for 3 replacement trees. Additionally, illustrative landscaping demonstrates significant opportunities for tree planting across the site, and therefore we do consider this to be acceptable. The proposals would far exceed the biodiversity net gain requirements of 10%, as demonstrated by the figures above. Further conditions have been added to the decision to further safeguard the environmental qualities of the site. Proposals are therefore considered to be acceptable. With regard to climate change, a sequential flood risk assessment has been provided and therefore is considered to be acceptable. The proposed development would include an energy centre, which would include air source heat pumps and electric boilers, providing transfer of surplus energy to the wider Bristol area, providing benefits which go beyond the site boundary. The proposals would achieve a residual carbon emissions reduction of 44%, almost doubling in excess of doubling the 20% requirements of BCS 14. Planning conditions have also been added to ensure embodied carbon and whole life carbon assessments for each phase, and the development is committed to meeting the BREEAM excellent standards. The proposals are therefore considered to be acceptable in terms of climate change. A range of development contributions have been sought, as outlined within section 25 of the committee report and outlined on screen at the moment. So, in conclusion, the BCC has demonstrated accordance with Regulation 26 of the EIA regs, with specific regards to 26(1)(b) with regard to transport and TVIA. The proposals represent a significant regeneration opportunity for Broadmead. Proposals are considered to be in accordance with the development plan as a whole and therefore acceptable. The principle of residential, including affordable housing, student accommodation, as well as other uses on the site, is considered to be acceptable and in accordance with the DDP aspirations. Although there has been heritage harm identified, we do consider there to be clear and demonstrable benefits which outweigh this harm, and therefore from a heritage perspective we do consider this to be acceptable also. The applicant has demonstrated the ability for ongoing and uninterrupted provision of primary healthcare services at the Broadmead Medical Centre, and we will continue to work with the ICB in forming a Section 106 agreement. There are clear and demonstrable public benefits which I have outlined throughout the presentation, and therefore this does warrant significant weight in the planning balance. Therefore, we do consider that the outline and full elements of the hybrid application to be acceptable, and the design code and the parameter plans to provide a robust framework with sufficient clarity to inform the reserve matters applications, which will come through in due course. As such, a recommendation is therefore made to members to resolve to grant planning permission, and delegated powers are sought to conclude the Section 106 and finalise planning conditions. That does conclude the presentation.
Thank you, John. Simone, do you want to conclude with anything? Or?
No, I think we'll just take your answers now.
Okay, thank you, John. That was excellent. Over now, questions from members. Would you put your hand up and I will make a list, please? Councillor Pulteney Guy, would you like to begin, please?
Thank you, Chair. There's two questions from me. First off, on the, I suppose, some clarity around the public forum from the ICB. I just want to be clear that what's requested by the ICB specifically is a mitigation payment rather than an enabling payment. That's to say, it's a sum of money in mitigation of services to be provided, but it doesn't seem to guarantee that the NHS will deliver those services if that money is provided, or that they'll be provided in the form being asked for. So to check that that's the case, I would guess from Jim. Do you want to do both questions at the same time, Chair?
Just do the one.
No, so that was one. I'll add the second one in.
I find it confusing when people do multiple questions.
I think Jim's capable of doing two.
I find it confusing.
Answer for Jim, and then I have a second for the transport
Well,
team,
he's not going to answer them at the same time. He's going to listen to the two and then answer them separately, aren't you, Jim? Thank you. Give us the second one, Guy.
So the second question is for the traffic and transport.
Oh, sorry, I
officers.
didn't. I thought it was a second question regarding the contributions. Over to you, Jim. Please answer that one.
Right. Yeah, I'll try and cover a load of ICB stuff here to deal with other questions that people might have. The ICB are in quite a difficult situation because they know they need to do something, but they don't really know what they're going to do yet. They've not signed a contract to leave and go to alternative premises elsewhere. They say that's their preference. They alternatively could potentially stay on site, though that would require quite a lot of fiddling around and toing and froing to enable that to happen. Either would be compliant as far as planning policy is concerned. What we do know is that whatever happens, once the building starts to be demolished, there are significant additional disruption costs that the ICB will incur in running the Broadmead Medical Centre. That'll either be costs that they'll incur in staying on site, because they'll need maybe extra staff, for example there. There'll be maybe costs in going into modular accommodation for a period of time whilst they're looking to move to their new permanent location on site, if that's what they decide to do. Or there'll be costs in moving to a new facility elsewhere, maybe in Quakers Friars or Cabot Circus or somewhere in the immediate vicinity. So we've identified that it is reasonable and within the scope of the SIL regulations to seek a contribution to cover for those disruption costs. We also acknowledge that there is clearly in this particular instance an identified level of growth from both student accommodation and the residential development. That will impact on the Broadmead Medical Centre, which is currently running at well over capacity. It's a poor quality facility. It's not purpose built. It's part of Boots basically. If you've been into there, where we and the ICB, to be fair, have struggled a little bit is coming to an agreed position as to what those actual contributions should be value wise, and where we've ended up, and it's not, we're not quite ideally, I think, where everybody would want to be. We've ended up with a split contribution, in effect, of about £1.3 million, of which I think it is somewhere around 900,000 is to cover for their disruption costs. The ICB, say their disruption costs are going to be nearer £2 million, 1.9 million. But they've been unable to provide us with detailed justification for that figure. The applicant thinks it's well overstated. The applicant would, because obviously they're the applicant and they're looking to keep their costs down, but that's fair enough. But also our the council's property advisors think that those costs seem particularly high as well. So we've not felt it's been justified to go with the full amount that they've asked for. The other part of that split contribution is the bit that deals with growth. And in this particular instance, why we felt it's okay to secure that contribution, where on previous schemes, particularly one last week, the Euro Council Portly, we haven't, is because in this instance, we know what they'll do. In effect, we know that the growth element of the contribution will be spent on the Broadmead Medical Centre. Whereas previously, they didn't really know what they were going to do with it, but this is a specific situation where they are aware of what they're going to do with it. Again, we've had a lot of discussion with the ICB, and we acknowledge the need for contribution, but we feel that the amount they're asking for is overstated. And I'll just give you a very brief example. They feel that from the residential element of the development, the 450 dwellings, the amount of people generated will be 2.4 persons per dwelling. And that's on the basis that the average occupancy of dwellings in Bristol is 2.4 persons. That's probably absolutely right, but Bristol has a mixture of dwellings ranging from studio flats to 5-6-bed houses. In this particular case, on this scheme, we know that what we're going to be getting is primarily 1-bed, 2-bed flats and about 10 to 13% 3-bed flats. And from the 2021 census data for Bristol, we know that those type of developments, those type of dwellings generate fewer than 2.4 persons, quite significantly in some cases. So we feel that their ask is a little bit overstated, But using up the census figures for Bristol, we've come to a view as to what we think the growth level of contribution should be, which is about £400,000 or £500,000, and that takes us to our 1.3 million. We'll have to work with the ICB and with the applicant in working out how that translates through to a Section 106 agreement. The likelihood is, I think, that we will end up somewhere with the disruption cost element probably having to be paid by the developer up front, because once they start demolishing, the ICB are either going to be off-site or they're going to be disrupted on-site. That's quite an unusual thing to have a contribution that large payable up front, but it is probably in this instance necessary, because at that point the ICB will start incurring those costs. The element to do with growth, I think there's a lot more discussion and flexibility to be had on that, because obviously the growth only starts taking effect as and when individual development blocks come forward. So I expect we'll look to work that through such that it's paid in stages over the life of the development. I hope that sort of covers what you're after and other bits that other people are after. If not, I apologise.
Thank you, Jim. That's a very, very comprehensive answer. If I may, my other
transport
question was for the transport officers.
Certainly.
Thank you very much for that. So, speaking of disruption up front, and I should say for the benefit of the other committee members, I did raise this query with officers yesterday just so that they were aware and had a chance to prepare, but I've not heard the answer. Was just in respect of what the officers' report referred to as the interplay between this development and the Strategic Corridors programme. Actually, Chair, you may be very familiar with from your previous role in the Cabinet. But this is a programme that involves the removal of the existing carriageways. If I get this wrong, I apologise, please correct me. Penn Street and Horsefair. And the provision of the displaced disabled parking and a little bit more disabled parking, bus stops for over 30 services, including some showcase routes, and a new taxi rank, all on Fairfax Street. Fairfax Street becomes the sole vehicular route through the area. Now, this is a programme that's funded through the West of England Combined Mayoral Authority, and the fund, I'm going to get this right, City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. That funding pot has to be spent by the end of 2027, I believe. If granted today, the developer would have 3 years to deliver the scheme, i.e. by January 2028. And that critical piece of transport infrastructure, Fairfax Street, runs right through the middle of it and is actually under quite a substantial amount of the building work to be done. And this development would add the energy centre, the public hub, the lift, and that junction would be the principal point of site access during construction as well. So could officers please put my mind at ease that there is not a risk that the council with one hand is about to cut all but one route through Broadmead off and then plunge that one route into a potentially lengthy development that could cut it off as well. Is this a risk? Am I worrying about nothing? Is there a risk that could be created through slippage? How would we mitigate the risk? Is there anything that we should do today? I'm thinking particularly of conditions around construction management and site management, but this either looks like it could potentially be the greatest bottleneck in the history of urban development.
Your point is made, Councillor Pulteney. Can we move on to the answer, please?
I've brought my colleague Will Feeks with me because Will has been doing most of the work on this. So I just want to say strategically, we are very confident that over the period of time of all the developments that are happening in the city centre, we have worked with the CRSTS project to make sure that the movement will be enabled each stage, so that each of the developments that come forward, they have to, when they discharge the relevant conditions, we make sure that they would apply with the current status of where the CRSTS programme is. So and we've worked with our bosses in city transport have been working with the buses to make sure they're happy with all the alternative options that will be available. Will be able to give you a bit more detail on that.
Hello. Thanks for the question. I suppose, yeah, firstly to note, and just to add to what Pip was saying, we are expecting to apply conditions relating to demolition management and construction management for each phase of development. As Pip rightly says, we would expect that with each phase of development, that construction management plan would be updated, so to reflect the current state of things. However, as has been noted, the sort of state of public transport in the area is in a state of sort of flux and sort of wholesale changes, as has been highlighted in the recent consultations on that. And so, in order to accommodate that, we've asked the applicant, and we were sort of quite clear with the applicant really early on in the pre-app stages when we sort of informed them well in advance of submitting their application that these changes were going to be made, that they would need to mitigate to the greatest possible extent that disruption. I think it's probable that disruption would begin at some point during demolition, but we asked their consultants to sort of switch around the sort of order in which they would demolish the building in order to minimise the period for which Fairfax Street would be closed.
Restricted.
Yeah, or restricted. At the moment, what we've identified is that there would still be some disruption, despite those efforts, which we think have sort of minimised that risk to the greatest possible extent. And so we would look through construction management plans to and working with the CRSTS programme managers to arrange for suitable diversion routes for public transport for the period, as I say, that has been minimised, to keep those buses running without undue disruption. I think it's sort of inevitable with a development of this size that there would be some disruptions, but we've looked to mitigate that where possible. I suppose I should also speak to the disabled parking point. And as you say, much of the existing disabled parking provision in the area is on Penn Street and Horsefair. There would be some re-provided within the gallery's redevelopment of Fairfax Street, but the sort of relocation of disabled parking is really something that we would look to secure in detail for the period that Fairfax Street is closed. We would look to secure that detail through construction management rather than at this stage. It's not usually something that we would consider in detail exactly where those spaces would be re-provided. However, there is an expectation that they would be, and that can all be secured by condition if and that's what we're proposing.
Thank you.
In the same vein as disabled parking, we would look to re-provide taxi ranks as close as possible to where people want to go, obviously, but where they will ultimately be located within Fairfax Street. But for the period that Fairfax Street is closed, we'd have to address that through the construction management plan.
Okay.
I think just one that all the preliminary designs have been to be able to secure the bus movement through how Fairfax Street will end up, with all those extra provisions for taxis and things in there. So we have, even though we will be able to sort that out in detailed design, we have all the designs that are currently attached to this allow that to be able to be maintained. That is the bus movement, or a vehicle the size of a bus, to be able to make that movement. So in essence, we believe that we've come to the best resolution possible in that location for this period of time.
Thank you. If I may go to Lisa now, and then Lisa.
Thank you. My questions were actually quite similar to Guy's, but I just had an extra question about the loss of public parking. There's going to be no provision for public parking within this development. Obviously, we want to encourage use of public transport and active travel. Do you feel assured that that loss of public parking won't have an impact on the businesses and retail that we're hoping to encourage into the area?
Our colleagues in the regeneration team did a survey of all the parking in the city centre, and the applicants were made aware of that. So all the car park, there are a lot of car parks in the city centre. So the math was done of what needs to be retained within which part of the parking. And just to say that we've made arrangements that our comms from the council comms will be able to give people advance notice of where those may change in the next, so each period of development that comes up from this, we will make sure the comms for the public is very well aware of where they would be able to make the access to their things. So in fairness to the developer, they have been helpful in doing that, but we've had to look at it cumulatively. So within their area of responsibility, we believe that that's appropriate.
Thank you, Lisa, and then Jenny.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask about, if we do approve this application, are we approving it really too fast because the master plan design code hasn't actually been approved yet? And the reason why I'm saying this is because we've been asked and told that 55% of these tall buildings are going to be single aspect. Does that mean that we'll be tied into that?
John, I think that's for you.
So the applicant has undertaken significant amounts of pre-application engagement since June 2020. So they've demonstrated a significant amount of engagement with the likes of Design West and with the likes of Historic England, with BCC also. In regard to your query around master plans, the DDP was being brought forward for endorsement during that engagement period, and therefore the applicant has proactively engaged with the DDP team to ensure that their proposals align with the aspirations of the DDP. So with that in mind, this hybrid planning permission and the proposals directly accord to the DDP's aspirations. It's worth noting also within the DDP Chapter 3, I think it's figure 36, stipulates that enhanced or amplified building heights would be allowed on, would be permissible across this site. That includes buildings which front onto Newgate and fronting onto Castle Park. So in terms of the taller buildings which are proposed across this site, the majority of them are located on that Newgate frontage. Also, in terms of the tall building aspect, the applicant has demonstrated an SBD accordance table as an appendix to the design and access statement, which outlines that the nature of the proposals would be in accordance with the SPD. And also, we are of the opinion that the design code and the parameter plans provide that level of reassurance and confidence that tall buildings would be appropriate on this site. There's a policy context for this, and it's supported within the endorsed DDP as well as a number of the emerging local plans policies. Sorry.
Can I come back on that, because I'm not too sure whether I understand what you were saying, because from what I can remember, single aspect buildings and single aspect properties or apartments in tall buildings are not policy compliant.
So the design code outlines that the requirements for dual aspect and single aspect properties across the development block. There's a number of the properties would require dual aspect to the habitable rooms. So it's of our understanding that this would be acceptable.
So is that just your understanding? Is it? I'm sure on tall buildings, single aspects is not policy compliant.
It's a policy, is not a law. Policies need to be balanced against each other, and sometimes.
Then it becomes subjective. So why are we here? Honestly.
Well, it is subjective. That's why we're here, weighing up the different things between us as a group. Fabian, could I just ask? There's a wider discussion here regarding what we're doing here, I guess. Maybe we take that up outside here. Have you heard enough? I don't think you're going to be satisfied, probably. No, you're not. Over to Jenny then. Jenny. Simone, would you wish to?
I was just trying to come in and clarify as well. What you're referring to is, I think, in the urban living SPD. It's a supplementary planning document. It's not even policy, so it's an additional guidance document. And certainly, you've seen the very long list of policies that we've assessed it against. It is compliant. We've got everything we need to make this decision on this tonight, and it is officers' advice that it is compliant and that we've got the necessary information to make that decision.
Jenny.
Yeah, I was going to ask about how we apply policy. I think my understanding is that I was about to say it, and now I'm confronting what I was about to say, I've answered my own question. So I'll ask the other question I had. So compared to, yes, they have been doing this since 2020. I've been seeing documents from them since 2020. And there's been a few changes to the sort of overall site layout. And I thought that it was potentially negative, some of the new ways they're laying them out, because they're sort of really fundamentally changing the shape and nature of like a quarter of Broadmead. I have questions about like the backs of the non-demolished buildings, so the Arms House and stuff. They won't be activated, I guess. So I'm finding it quite hard. Basically, my summary is, I'm finding it quite hard to picture whether this will be a functioning, contiguous high street as you would expect in Broadmead, as is kind of delivered the whole way around. Because I feel like with especially the swing block, it's quite broken up, and it feels quite bitty compared to previous iterations I'd seen. So I wondered what the motivation for those changes were, and whether we're happy that it's better now.
Sure. So elements of the stakeholder engagement have included the relocation of the tallest elements from the east Merchant Street to the west. This has included the tallest elements. This was based on Historic England's guidance. This included a 10-storey reduction to the tallest elements, as we cited within the heritage section of the presentation. No effects are anticipated to Quakers Friars. So there's a clear kind of justification for the relocation of the tallest elements to Block A is the residential block. It's probably worth noting there, in terms of your points to the merchant tailors' almshouses and the areas to the rear of it and its activation, the design code sets out clear requirements in terms of section requirements and how this public realm will be provided. So the area to the rear of the almshouses is referred to within the design code as Almshouse Square. So there are clear requirements in terms of the public activation and public realm requirements in that area, and with regard to landscaping, street furniture, kind of, say like dwell spaces, and how that areas would come forward. What's also worth noting is that the design code sets out the requirements for building articulation and materials. You'll probably note within the design code there's a number of setbacks, and the number of the blocks would be in different forms, so rather than one single mass. So there would be building articulation that would be provided to that new gate frontage and also to the public realm within the site. So yeah, in terms of the design code and parameter plans, it provides a holistic approach as to how the development would bring about high quality design across the multiple phases, across the multiple reserve matters applications. So yeah, there's been clear efforts to ensure a functional design, but also meets a high quality living area for residents, both those that are living on site and those that are visiting.
Thank you. Okay, unless there are any further, Caroline? Fabian, did you still wish to?
No, I think
you don't.
We moved on.
Okay, Caroline and then Lisa, and unless somebody's really urgently wants to ask another question, we'll move to discussion.
Hi, I was going to say the read somewhere in the report, I don't know whether it was this one or another one, that people were assuming that students go to their GPs at home. They don't tend to. They tend to go to the University Health Centre. So I just checked, there is a University Health Centre, so that's fine. That is an issue. If it is oversubscribed, then it may be worth actually thinking about. It's possible, especially if this area is a long way from where the student health centre is, that the students might prefer to actually register locally. And so it might be worth actually bringing that into consideration. And I have got one other question. I can go to that one, which is...
That wasn't a question, that was a comment, the first one. But anyway,
okay,
you can have a question, that's what we're here for.
The question is, can you bring up slide 9 again, possibly? So it's just looking at, so I was got confused because obviously where this tall high rise has clearly moved about. And so this is where it's going to be at the moment, Block D, which is right next to the park, Castle Park. Is that correct?
Block A. Block A facing St Peter's.
Sorry, do you mean Block A?
Block A. Oh, okay, Block A, yes. So it's the one facing St Peter's. I'm confused to why it's so close, because when you look at the some of the other kind of images, it's right next to St Peter's, and why was it moved there? Because that seems to be the worst place it could be for massing over St Peter's.
Of course, yeah. So in terms, this was articulated with Historic England through the pre-application engagement. It's probably worth noting as well, what we have on screen at the moment is the illustrative scheme, and it is not for approval. There are a number of parameters in play as part of the outline permission. So yeah, in terms of the building articulation and design, building materials would obviously would need to accord with the design code requirements. It's also probably worth outlining here within the second and the third Historic England consultation response, specific amendments to the design code were required to ensure that the roof design of building A kind of pays homage and respects the church tower of St Peter's Church. So subject to these revisions being made by the applicant, which were undertaken in November and December of 2024, the Historic England's objection was removed. So with regard to heritage, concerns relating to building A were removed. So the objection was therefore withdrawn.
Right. It just looks, well, to me, it looks very incongruous. And
Not to historic England.
no, apparently not. But some local groups obviously still think it does. So, I did have one other thing. What was it? This is the last time a development committee is going to see this, isn't it? So every other... No.
It's part outline.
Oh, each bit, okay, because I read that there was reserved matters.
Yeah,
so I
it
was...
comes back.
Okay.
Is agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, can we have a clear explanation? I think it's an important point.
So this part of the permission is in outline form. So reserve matters applications will come forward, which will detail the means of access, the design. All reserve matters are reserved, and therefore, as each reserve matters application is submitted for the relevant phase, it's likely that these will be coming forward either to committee, and they will be subject to reconsultation with the relevant stakeholders at each reserve matters application stage. So it's not the last time that the application will be assessed. Each of the relevant reserve matters will be assessed by internal, external and amenity groups.
Thank you.
Lisa.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that. If you go to slide 10, I was just looking at it. I'm still a little bit concerned with the overall planning, because it's a master plan, it's an outline planning permission. However, when we do come back to discuss or debate reserve matters, how much of these maximum and minimum square meterage can we be discussing? I'm just a little bit concerned about the height and mass of the application, and then when we go to obviously look at the detailed design, how much of it we can actually change.
John, would you like to try and pin down that? Because we are definitely approving some things today, fixing them in order that the applicant can move on to the next stages. So I think if Lisa doesn't realise that, it'd be helpful to clarify that for the benefit of everyone.
So the development floor schedule that's currently on screen, this relates to the maximum amount of space that's allowed per use class. So the reserve matters will not be allowed to exceed that maximum. So essentially, at the moment, you are assessing kind of the worst case. So it can't exceed the maximums and it can't go below the minimums. In terms of the requirements for heights and building design, these would be established through the parameter plans and the design code. So the design code outlines a range of codes or requirements. There are absolute codes, and these are obligatory requirements of the applicant to conform with at the reserve matters stage. So what you are potentially approving is that the guides and the requirements that need to be followed, and they can't exceed the maximum parameters.
Yeah, can I come back, because that's exactly what I'm concerned about. You can't exceed so for example, public hub, we can't exceed that maximum space. Public is 424 square meters. That's what I'm concerned about. If we want, this whole development was meant to bring people of Bristol together. It was meant to, in the DTP, it was meant to bring people together so they come into a space. It was meant to provide community space, free space, allowing people to come from all areas of the city. And I'm concerned that if we are going to limit our public hub space with this over mass planning application at this stage, then where do we go?
Okay, that's not really a question, is it? That's a concern. Was it a question?
I think to my mind, there's two things being conflated in kind of spaces where community can meet and come together, and the public hub, very specific. It's more specific than what you've described, and I think that is what this is relating to. Ultimately, if there were minor changes that a future applicant wanted to make, and, for example, increase some of that, they could propose that, and you could then consider at that point as well whether you would accept that change or not. But that is what is put forward in front of you right now.
Sorry, just to add to Simone's point there, Under the full element, there would be a change of use of 350 square metres to the merchant tailors' almshouses, and that would be for community and cultural use. So in addition to that 424 square metres that you've cited, there is an additional 350 to the merchant tailors' almshouses as well. That is cited. I mean, in addition to that, there are significant public realm benefits to this project, that including kind of the Almshouses Square and Union Yard. Although not included within a specific use class, it's noted that these areas are significant benefits to the community and where people may meet. So although not necessarily included within a use class schedule, there are wider benefits where the community can meet and use the space, which is significantly better than the existing gallery shopping centre. There's wider benefits than beyond the total figures you see on screen.
Thank you. Great. I think we're over to the discussion now. So hands up, anyone? And obviously keep your points as brief as possible. Fabian.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to support the officer recommendation. I think, yes, it's a reserve map. This is sort of outline application. It allows the developer to crack on. I think so many things in Bristol take so long to actually process. If we need to chew over the details of this or that block, when it turns up as a reserve matter application, we can do it then. I think, in principle, we've got to get this moving, so I'm going to be supporting it.
Thank you. I've got Guy next.
Thank you, Chair. We've sat in some of these phased developments before. I've seen quite a few of them over the years, where a developer sought to put all of the risk of the uncertainty of the phasing of the development onto the council. I've seen occasions on which the council has accepted that risk in exchange for the public benefits of the scheme overall. I think it's only fair to say that doesn't seem to be the case here. The developer seems to have taken on quite a substantial share of the risk in terms of doing the demolition, providing some of the public amenity that came out of the public engagement exercise, and only then negotiating the having agreed that, we'll then move on to negotiating the more lucrative elements of the scheme that should provide some return on that investment. I think the developer should be congratulated on that. I do still have concerns around Fairfax Street. I have significant concerns around Fairfax Street, but I have to admit, I thought what the officer said was very persuasive, and I would add that, frankly, if the council's decision is to close down the other routes prior to this development taking place, the council will have to carry the can if this goes wrong. I think it really is for the council to deal with its transport and movement plan around this at this point. This is the first thing that's come in front of us. I'm not sure if the corridors policy will require a planning application in its own right.
Probably
It'll just go straight through Transport Committee.
Assessment, maybe.
We need a TRO, but in any case, and finally, I just want to say on the point of the ICB, I have to admit, I shared some of the concerns that other councillors had raised in respect of where students might register, where people might register. In my experience, at least, I think it would be very unusual if all of the students registered at the GP practice close to where they were in their first year only. And almost all of my interactions with my GP are now online or over the phone. And if I was on whatever arrangement I had with my home GP, I probably wouldn't change all of that just for the place I was living for my first year. It's not to say a lot of them won't. But I think assuming that they all will register as soon as they arrive in line with the guidance is probably not something we could... It's probably not an issue we could consider foisting on the developer in a way that's proportionate. So with that in mind, as someone who came through genuinely on the fence, I think I'm at the point of agreeing with colleagues and to support the officer recommendation at this point. Thanks.
Thank you. Jenny?
Yeah, the main thing I wanted to raise as a concern that we haven't really spoken about yet is the fact that this building, the majority of it, is younger than me. And for those viewing at home, I am very young. Yeah, and we're demolishing an awful lot of building that is really quite new, and I worry about the kind of precedent that sets. I don't think that it's really within our broader policy, because it's not very green. Having said that, I think that it is otherwise a very strong application, and I do support it. I'm glad to see that the applicant is working very hard on this. I'm aware that only, 8 years ago or something, the whole of the other half of Broadmead came through as a proposed demolition and being rebuilt, and that got permission and it didn't happen. So I hope that we can continue having that engagement, and that this time Broadmead will actually get the regeneration that I hope to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments, or Lisa?
Yeah, so having seen all the iterations of Broadmead in my lifetime, which has been quite many over the last 50 odd years, I am minded to support this application. I'm minded to support the application. However, I am still concerned about the density, but we can flesh that out, obviously, when at different stages. And I'd also look at, BREEAM excellence. I think really we should be heading towards BREEAM outstanding, to be honest with you. This is it should be a class 1 exemplary development, which should be brilliant, to be honest with you. Thanks.
Anybody else before we move to the Guy? You've spoken already, have you?
I have, and I promise to keep it brief, Chair. I really do, but it's I would feel remiss if I didn't mention this. This is one of the biggest, most complex applications I've ever seen. It genuinely it dwarfs almost everything that normally comes before this committee. The work in front of us tonight has been, I hope I speak for all of the committee here, I think exemplary. And we are at a point where not that long ago, this authority was designated, and I don't think it's unfair to say that the planning department was not at its best. And the fact that the number of officers that have been involved in this, and how ably the team has been led, and how on top of their briefs officers have been, as far as I can tell, throughout this application, I think is genuinely a testament to the authority's resilience and the hard-working commitment of those officers, and I really think they deserve some congratulations in this as well.
Thank you. Of course, the authority was never designated for poor quality of work. It was designated for, if I could just, and I've never, some very big applications have come through here, the Arena, Temple Island, many things have come through here during my time, and quality of the work has never been faltered as far as I'm concerned. Fabian?
Yeah, I'd like to propose the officer recommendation.
You would like to move the officer recommendation.
Please.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Pulteney? In that case, I will move round one at a time and ask you to vote in for or against the approval of the officer recommendation. Councillor Bartle, for or against?
For.
Councillor Pulteney?
For.
Councillor Durston? Yes. Councillor McCowie?
For.
Councillor
you missed Lisa Stone. You need to ask, is Lisa Stone, you're missing the two Lisas up. So you need to ask Lisa Stone.
Sorry, I'm absolutely right. I've done that before. Councillor Stone?
For.
Councillor McCowie?
For.
Councillor Badruddin?
For.
Councillor Gooch?
For.
Councillor Durston?
For.
And Councillor Breckles?
For.
Myself, for. That is unanimous. Thank you. We will now take a 10-minute break. That means at 7:45, you'll be in your seat. Thank you. That's not members of the public, that's members of the committee. Well done, John. You're going to retire now, John, or you're retiring? You move on to the next stage now, don't you? Our next application is Concrete Fabrication Limited, Blackswarth Road, Bristol, BS5 8UU. Public forum. I will read out all the names I have here, although I'm not sure exactly who's speaking. Rob Acton Campbell, Councillor Francis, Susan Acton Campbell. Thank you.
I represent the St George Community Association Development Group. We made our first public statement on the basis of our concern at the speed at which the decision is being taken on the current design. We made a very detailed response on the design 2 years ago, but this latest design came through starting on the 17th of December. However, this afternoon we became aware of the summary that had been provided by the developer for the committee, and there is a reference in that summary about the possibility of a housing association being able to make use of government grant funding, which could provide 100% affordable housing on the entire site. Given that information, and if that is the reason for the speedy process of this brand new design, then we would be fully in support of that. Thank you.
Thank you. We will clarify that, I'm sure, in a moment with Jim. And Kit Stokes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I act for Woodstock Homes. They're a long-standing Bristol-based SME. In my statement, I've covered all the changes that we've worked for with officers over the last 2.5, 3 years. So reduction in scale, reduction in height, changes to architectural approach, the removal of a retaining wall, improving biodiversity, landscaping, widening the towpath, flood risk changes, you name it. It really doesn't feel like it's been a very quick process. We've been pushed hard and delivered on some key changes. So I don't feel that the design speed has been quick, but it's been very thorough. In terms of the Housing Association, I have mentioned Woodstock are looking to partnership with a registered provider, but that may be to deliver affordable housing with grant funding, open market housing, shared ownership, but that is separate to this process, and I'm sure officers will be able to explain that to members more fully. So, but thank you for officers for really engaging in this process. It's been good, and it really is a good scheme, and I hope you can approve it tonight.
Thank you very much. That's the end of the public forum. Councillor Breyer. That wasn't deliberate, Councillor Breyer.
Thank you,
You
Chair.
have 2 minutes like everybody else, mind.
Thank you, Chair. I don't need the full 2 minutes, don't worry about that. I just wanted to stand up and say this is a significant development, obviously, in my ward. I do think, on the balance, it does merit approval. I think you've got some questions maybe to ask about the issues that have already been raised in public forum around affordable housing, because at the moment it's 0% affordable housing and it could be as much as 100%. So that is an open question. But I think the gentle density principles we like to see in planning are present in this application. They have drastically changed the designs since the original proposals. For the better. I do think there was more that could be done around sustainable transport, and that road particularly being pretty hostile to cyclists. But they have put in a safer crossing as part of their agreement, and I do think some of the benefits that come from this scheme are definitely going to be popular in the local area, despite a number of local residents, of course, objecting to the height of the buildings. I do think that they fit with the principles that we need for good development in the city. So I do support it. I think there are some drawbacks, but on the whole, it is a good development, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have the presentation from Charlotte and the team.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me.
I'd just like to start by drawing your attention briefly to the amendment sheet. There are a number of amendments on there, and I'll touch on some of those through the presentation. On the first point, there is a further consultation ongoing. However, this is a technical matter, and I've addressed that within the amendment sheet. Summary of consultation responses is given at pages 153 to 4 of the report, noting the second round of consultation that has been referenced at page 155. And this accords with all of our requirements in terms of consultation. So the application site is in St George Westward, adjacent to the River Avon. The above slide shows the red line boundary of the site and existing accesses, which you can see in this location with access to a raised parking area here. Also of note are the pedestrian cycle bridge crossing to Wyatt's View across the river, and the towpath cycle pedestrian route running along the southern boundary of the site. To note from the above slide are the mixed-use character of the area with a mix of residential and commercial uses. Also of note are the level changes with the surrounding land and the fact that with this site, the boundaries of the site are formed by considerable retaining walls. Also to note just the general topography of this area in terms of views. The site is in the Avon Valley Conservation Area, and the River Avon is a site of nature conservation interest. The above images give you an idea of that character, of the wooded character of the river valley, and the context with the business park to the west, which you can see in these images here, the dark grey buildings. Above are a number of further views from around the site showing its character, including the towpath in the image at the bottom there. The site is the subject of an emerging development allocation for housing-led mixed-use development for 75 homes. The original proposal at the top was for 85 homes, but as you've heard, following lengthy negotiation by officers, the scheme was revised to the layout in the bottom image for 68 homes. This was revised to address highway access issues, introduce a residential block and street frontage to Blackworth Road in this location, to reduce the scale from 6 stories to 4 stories with a 3-story block, to reorientate the blocks to improve the landscape frontage to the river and to provide a flood defence embankment along the river. The above image shows the proposed site layout. With reference to the amendment sheet, just to note that the applicant has now confirmed the provision of 2 accessible dwellings, which would be within block floor, and there are 2 accessible parking spaces linked to those. In flood risk terms, the proposed site level would be raised and a flood defence embankment proposed, which is this sort of dark green hatched strip along the southern boundary of the site. At the time of writing the report, we had not had Environment Agency final comment. We've now received that today, and they have raised an objection to the proposal. These are technical considerations relating to the height of the embankment and data available on flood compensation storage. Given the technical nature of these matters, officers request that these matters can be delegated to officers to resolve. As set out at page 164 of the report, the proposal is identified as being acceptable in highways terms subject to conditions in section 106 agreement. Traffic calming measures and footway widening are proposed to Blackswarth Road, as well as lighting upgrades and weighting restrictions, and this is considered to be a proportionate approach to this development. Above, on the screen there, you can see the elevation drawings, and there's further section drawings in your supporting packs. The local planning authority considers the proposed amount, density and mix of development acceptable. The proposed urban design approach, as well as the future living environment created and impact on our neighbours, are also considered acceptable. Above, on the screen are some of the 3D visuals of the proposal. Updates have been submitted to the relevant reports since the report was completed, and the proposal would exceed requirements in terms of renewable energy generation provision and would be acceptable in terms of overheating. Prior to decision, confirmation would be required of the space requirement for the proposed solar panels and communal air source heat pump system. Officers overall consider this to be an acceptable urban design approach subject to conditions and successful resolution of flood risk and matters relating to the historic boundary wall as detailed in the report. The above photos on the screen show the stone boundary wall indicating its varying materials and quality. The images at the top are the elements of the wall that are sort of better preserved in terms of historic material, whereas at the bottom, typically towards the eastern end of the site, it's been altered significantly in the past. The stone boundary wall is currently proposed to be removed to provide the flood defence embankment. Until the flood risk matters have been resolved with the Environment Agency, insufficient justification is provided for its removal. So that needs to be reviewed in conjunction with the flood risk and towpath widening proposals going forward. The current proposal includes widening of the adjacent towpath to 4 metres from approximately 2.5 metres width. The above slide shows land that the applicant has proposed towards widening in green, and the purple strip is Harbour Estates land that could be provided towards widening of that path. Again, this needs further discussion and consideration following discussion of the flood risk embankment requirements with the Environment Agency, but would be, in principle, possible subject to further details. In summary, the LPA's full assessment is made in detail in the report, but to remind members that the NPPF requires a presumption in favour of sustainable development unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. And page 177 of the report sets out the relative weights that the LPA advises is given to different aspects of the proposal. The main adverse impacts and benefits are summarised above. While the proposal doesn't include affordable housing, the evidence is that the scheme is unable to provide affordable housing in viability terms, and the Planning Obligations Manager can answer further questions in this regard. Despite this, the officers advise that the planning benefits would clearly outweigh the adverse impacts subject to resolution of the remaining technical matters relating to flood risk and heritage. We therefore seek delegated authority to approve the application subject to resolution of these matters, subject to conditions and the Section 106 requirements outlined in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Fabian.
Just a minor one. I'm slightly curious, given with these sort of elevations of the design, that Block 5 is stylistically completely different to the others. I'm curious as to why that's the case.
I think because it was of a different scale and there's a desire to sort of break up the development in some regards, and it was because this part of the site is next to the bridge crossing, it was considered that could be a sort of, to act as a focal point and a sort of almost like a wayfinder, something more distinctive. They've taken a different approach.
There we are. Any other questions? Jenny.
Yeah, my question was about the amount of parking on this site. I didn't really understand why there's so much. I would have thought that one of the, there's the little set of them that's next to the road, like at the top of the, there's like 8 there. And I just thought that was a bit peculiar. And I think that in terms of the emerging local plan, the more housing you can get on a site and the less parking, the more compatible it is. So I just wanted to question that.
think the overall parking level was reduced. It was actually higher to begin with, and it had been reduced during the course of the application. I think the site is peculiar in some respects with that raised level, and it's partly because of the topography and the sort of retaining wall structures that are very significant in this part of the site that may be a limiting factor into, you know, what you can actually do in that area of the site in terms of stability and structural constraints. But in terms of the overall parking level, it would be considered within our standards. Two of the spaces, as I mentioned, are for specific accessible parking spaces. I think one would be, could become a car club parking space. And there was also reference in the report to needing to resolve some of the cycle storage provision, because that was stated to be vertical cycle parking. So, you know, once those matters have been considered, that could potentially result in, say, a further loss of 2 parking spaces. But overall, the amount is acceptable and within policy standards.
Thank you. Lisa?
I know it may have been touched upon a few times, but I'd just really like somebody to really clarify whether or not we have a housing association that can provide 100% affordable housing or not. Just clarify, please.
Right, so at this moment in time, the scheme is being determined, as most schemes are, by the council. It's not, the applicant is not a housing association. The scheme is being determined as a commercial scheme. The reason the issue has raised itself is that the applicant does have a partnership arm, and they are working on other sites in Bristol, one up in Henbury, for example, to deliver a 100% affordable housing scheme on what was previously a commercial site. So they have done this around the place. They have done this before. They may choose to do it. They may not. They may decide it's more profitable to build it out themselves, or that it's a lower risk and slightly less profitable, but an easier job to partner with a housing association. Ultimately, it's not a planning matter. The way we have to determine the application is in accordance with local and national planning policies. And our planning policy for this part of the world for affordable housing is 30% is what we would seek to secure, subject to scheme viability. So the fact that the scheme might come forward as a 100% affordable housing scheme would be great, but you can't take it into account in determining the application. Any questions you've got about viability, I can pick up on those, but the potential for a 100% affordable housing scheme is unfortunately not a planning matter that's pertinent to the determination of this.
Thank you. Would someone like to raise the question of viability now, whilst we have Jim here and speaking? Guy, are you going to do that?
I would hugely appreciate some commentary on the viability of the scheme overall. And it's particularly, I suppose, and apologies, this does happen to me occasionally. Very often when we have these reports, they're sort of across multiple documents, if you like. I had a recollection from reading it yesterday and the day before that there was a double trigger point, as it were, for the viability assessments. There was one in 18 months' time and one pre-commencement viability check as well as. So you comment on that first, and I may have a follow-up if that's okay.
Yeah. So where the viability assessment undertaken for the council by our consultant, though it didn't agree in many areas with the viability assessment undertaken for the applicant, they did conclude that in planning terms the scheme was marginally just unviable. It is a difficult site, as Charlotte has mentioned. You've got lots of level issues, and you've got the river wall, and so on and so forth. Where we are unable to secure affordable housing, or unable to secure an amount that's anywhere near policy compliant, we do seek viability reviews, such that if the market picks up over time, any benefit in that market pickup is shared between the developer and the council. The developer needs to have an incentive to build, so they need to be able to share in that market pickup. But if the viability of the scheme improves over time, we would seek viability reviews. And the approach that we have is that we seek a review if development has not commenced within 18 months of planning consent being granted. Now, that's an old one because it's a review that we actually don't want to do. It's a carrot and stick thing. We want the developers to get on and develop. Bristol needs the housing. So we put that review in to encourage people to get on with it because actually nobody likes viability reviews. They're a pain in the neck. They create uncertainty for developers and funders and goodness knows what else. But we need to protect our position. So we put that one in to encourage developers to get on with it, in effect. And then another one in prior to first occupation, by which time we will know what the actual costs are because they'll have been incurred. And we'll know what the scheme's worth because it'll be marketed and units will have been sold. So we'll have an indication as to whether the viability of the scheme has increased sufficiently to enable a contribution of some way, shape or form. The other thing we've put in is that if, prior to commencement, it becomes clear that the scheme isn't going to be a 100% affordable housing scheme, or it will be delivering 30% affordable housing through a partnership with a housing association, then we wouldn't want to do the viability review because it doesn't really serve a useful purpose in that respect.
Thank you. That is very helpful. And I may be barking up completely the wrong tree with this, but I thought it was worth raising because I think it's fair to say that all of the councillors, when not acting in a quasi-judicial process, would bend over backwards to deliver the volume of social housing that could potentially be here. And I'm old enough to remember sitting in exactly pretty much this spot talking about the concept of an enabling development. That's to say a development that came so close to meeting the objectives of this council that we would relax our approach to planning obligations to ensure that it delivered them. And I was wondering if that is something that still ever happens or something that it would be even possible to consider in this case.
Right, so enabling development is a specific thing. And it's set out in the National Planning Policy Framework, and I can't recount it exactly to you, but it really relates to the retention and reuse of listed buildings. So it's enabling development is enabling those buildings to be retained and used, and sometimes because of the logistics around listed buildings and the difficulties around developing it, there are very significant challenges viability-wise. So an enabling development enables policies to be relaxed a little bit and a slightly different approach to be taken. So enabling development is not, this isn't an enabling development case. Sorry, that's a bit mangled, but I hope you get the gist of it.
So the one that I was thinking of was a supermarket that was potentially enabling a stadium, which doesn't sound like either of those things, but this was a very long time ago.
Thank you. Any further questions, Caroline?
Yeah, sorry. I think I might have missed it, or I might just being stupid, but on the planning balance summary that, in the PDF that we were sent this afternoon, it says 0% affordable housing. So you're saying there'll be at least 30%? No.
Sorry, Councillor Gooch, that's probably my mistake for not being clear. The scheme can come forward. If you were to grant it today, the scheme could come forward with the 0% affordable housing at this moment in time, but we would reassess viability over the life of the scheme to see if some affordable housing could be provided if the viability improves, if the market conditions improve. So the 30% or the 100% is if the applicant chooses to partner with a housing association. But we're not able to take account of that because the applicant isn't a housing association, the applicant is an open market developer. So as it stands today, if you were to grant consent, the applicant could make a start and build out a 100% open market scheme. If they started within 18 months, we wouldn't check the viability then. We would definitely check the viability at the end, and if at the end it was found that it could provide some affordable housing, then it may provide a unit or two on site, or more realistically an off-site financial contribution for affordable housing elsewhere. But there is, if you were to grant consent today, the scheme could come forward on a basis of 0% affordable housing.
Isn't that against our local plan?
No, every local plan in the country has an affordable housing policy in it. And there is no local plan in the country that would ever be adopted if the affordable housing policy didn't say the words subject to scheme viability after the percentage figure. So perversely, we are inherently we're saying at this particular site, unfortunately, but perhaps not surprisingly, 0% affordable housing scheme is policy compliant, because the viability work that has been undertaken has shown that in planning terms it cannot provide affordable housing.
Are they going to be shoring up, looking at the riverbank work? So is it because of the amount of work that needs to be done on the riverbank and that wall that is actually, that's costing so much that's the reason why it's not
partly
necessarily?
It's not the sole reason, but it exacerbates it.
Right, okay.
So if you look at the relevant section in the report, when we got the viability work back from both the applicant and the work that we commissioned, I cross-checked that against the work that was undertaken to support the local plan, because we have to do viability work to support the local plan. And that looks at hundreds and hundreds of scenarios, development scenarios across Bristol. And the scenario for a development of about this size in BS5 showed that it was unlikely to be viable. So irrespective of the harbour wall or the river wall works, it is not surprising that the scheme is shown to be unviable. But there are additional expenses incurred in bringing this scheme forward, which to be fair, that impacts on land value. So land value, we depress that a little bit to take account of those, but there are additional costs in bringing this scheme forward that don't assist with viability.
Okay, thank you.
Guy, and then I think I'll move to discussion.
Final question. Thanks, Chair. I choose my words carefully on this then. I suppose what I'm asking is, given how fast moving this situation has been and the amount of change that we've seen relatively recently in the run-up to this determination, is there anything that members are being asked to determine at this meeting which, if delegated to officers, could create a greater degree of flexibility that actually might deliver a better outcome? As in, is there anything on the decision docket, as it were, for today, where we can actually go in the opposite direction than committees normally do and say, actually, we would happily delegate more of this to officers if it created the flexibility to negotiate, make viable, help generate a better option than we... Is there any chance that we're tying your hands with any element of this, is what I'm saying?
We could have delegated the whole thing.
And still could, Chair.
And that's one of the discussions, isn't it, really, is to leave it open to officers, and trust officers could actually lead to a better outcome. But that's for another day, Jim. Carry on. No, your comment isn't for my comments are for another day. Your comments...
I think the likelihood is, and I'm not fully au fait with the issues that Charlotte needs to resolve relating to the Environment Agency, etc., but if the Environment Agency have issues that require further work to be resolved, in my experience, they don't make schemes cheaper. So I would imagine that the works that still need resolving that Charlotte's seeking delegated authority to get on with probably won't be helping us in terms of viability. I can't give you that is actually the case, because I don't know the specifics, but I would think it's highly unlikely. And the scheme viability does have to shift by £300,000 or £400,000 to make it viable. A lot to you and I, but it's a relatively small amount, but it's actually still quite a shift.
Indeed. It's not surprising the Environment Agency are interested in this, is it really? Given it's where it is, it doesn't surprise me that they have asked to see more.
Is it worth just saying that I think there's just a really clear set of steps to go through in terms of those technical matters, because that clearly flood risk needs to be addressed for the whole proposal to be deliverable. So that's the sort of starting step, and then the other points would follow after that. So just to emphasise really that's a very clear pathway, I think, to considering those matters.
Thank you. Caroline, is it a question or you wish to discuss? It can be a question, but it needs to be the last one, I think.
I think there's just a question about whether we can ask for certain things, such as, I was just reading about the cycle parking, so I was just thinking that it would be...
You'd need to pin that down. What sort of things would you like to ask?
They've basically said that the cycle parking is uncovered and the Sheffield stands are too close together to be used by two bikes. So it would be to ask for provision for better cycle parking.
So the applicant has already taken a step to reviewing that in between the report being completed and today. We've not had quite a chance to fully review that yet, but we think that we can get an improved solution to that. So that could be either during the period we're discussing flood risks with the Environment Agency or via condition.
Thank you. Lisa, is this a question?
It is a very quick question.
Good, it's very quick, you said.
I just want to question the fact that this is in a conservation area and the design of these buildings are not really that beautiful. Is there any way that we can defer this to get them to redesign the whole thing so it's more viable? I think, yes, design is subjective. Our urban design colleagues were satisfied and have confirmed this is good design. So no objection from our side.
Right, we move to discussion then. Please make succinct points pertinent. Fabian.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right that we should, it seems that time is of the essence if there's a possibility of affordable housing on this site, that we need to move quickly. I think I'm quite happy to delegate the technical issues to officers. Yeah, it's in a conservation area and these are fairly obviously new buildings, but if you look at the photo of what's actually there already, it's not exactly charming. So it would be, this is subjective, but it would take real effort to make it come up with anything looking worse. So I think we need the housing. We're going to potentially get some really good extra flood defences in the area. It's near my ward, so I do understand, that bit of Bristol isn't linked to much in the way of public transport services, which would explain slightly more car parking than you'd expect elsewhere, maybe on a main bus route. So I think, on balance, I think it's a good scheme and I'm going to support it.
Thank you. Guy?
Thank you, Chair. The officer's recommendation is to grant on balance, and I have to admit I'd come into this with same reservations as I come into almost all of these planning committee meetings with. That said, my concerns are somewhat addressed by that double trigger on the viability assessment. I think that goes a long way to providing reassurances that there will only be no social housing if there is absolutely no viable way of providing social housing on that site. And that does put my mind at ease. And recognising Councillor Breckles' point, obviously we're not allowed to take into account the possibility of 100% affordable on the site in the same way as we wouldn't be allowed to take into account the hypothetical that the council could buy the units and use them as council housing. But on balance, it's a leap of faith a little bit, and I like to think there's still just enough room for a little bit of a leap of faith. So I think at the moment I'm voting with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Caroline.
I don't mind the look of this one. It actually reminds me very much of the Harrods Depository on the Riverside in London. It looks very similar, and the fact that there's that extra block of the red brick, I think, actually helps that. The fact that they're shoring up the Riverside bank, I think, is very helpful. It would cost us a lot to do it. And I think generally it's quite good if they could get the cycle stands sorted out, then it would be very good. I support it, so I'll be voting for it.
Thank you. Lisa?
Thanks. I just want to acknowledge that it's obviously quite a difficult site to develop. The fact that it's come back with alternative designs, I think, is really good. I quite like the way it looks. I think it's a lovely place for people to move into. So yeah, I will be supporting it.
Thank you. Okay. I wish to move the officer recommendation, which is to grant, subject to planning agreement. Second from Councillor Breckles. I shall go round. Councillor Bartle, for or against?
For.
Councillor Pulteney?
For.
Councillor Stone?
For.
Councillor McCowie?
For.
Councillor Bedreddin?
Yeah.
Councillor Gooch? Councillor
For.
Durst? For. Thank you. Councillor Durston?
For.
Councillor Breckles?
For.
And myself for. That means unanimous. That is passed. Thank you. We move now on to Falmouth, 29 Falmouth, Bishopston, Bristol, BS7 8PU. And in our public forum, we have Emma Morrison.
Thank you. This proposal would result in an extension to the existing HMO. It provides additional bedrooms within the extended roof space, new communal space at basement level, which opens onto the garden. The application site is in a location which is wholly in accordance with Bristol's adopted development plan, and it's served by a wide range of local services with excellent public transport links. The applicant has sought to provide high-quality living accommodation which meets the relevant space standards. The proposals include 8 secure cycle spaces and bin storage which has the capacity to serve the whole HMO. The applicant has also sought to protect local amenity through the submission of a landlord management plan, and the recommended conditions also include measures to further minimise any potential for disturbance. It has also been confirmed that there is enough parking capacity locally to accommodate the future additional occupants of the site. It is therefore hoped that you will support this application in accordance with the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Ellen Fraser? No. In that case, we move on to the officer presentation.
Thank you. There is a slight amendment to this one, which is that in the report it states that there's only 4 cycle parking spaces, but this is in fact 8. So the application is for the change of use from a small HMO to a 7-bedroom HMO for up to 8 occupants, with various external changes at 29 Falmouth Road, which is located within the boundary of the Redland ward. The site is located on an intersection between Falmouth and Bishop Road and consists of a 2-storey end-of-terrace dwelling with a wraparound garden. The application dwelling has previously had a certificate of lawfulness issued for a hip-to-gable and dormer roof extension and skylights. Under the general permitted development order, the alterations described can be completed without planning permission. A certificate of lawfulness can be issued in relation to changes completed under the permitted development as a way of ensuring that they comply with the criteria set out within. The application is for a change of use from a small HMO to a 7-bedroom HMO with the hip-to-gable roof extension and rear dormer. As detailed in the amendment sheet, the C4 use was existing prior to the Article 4 direction coming into force. The applicant has provided tenancy agreements to substantiate this. However, the application has still been assessed and in line with the requirements for large HMO. Internal works include the creation of 4 additional bedrooms and a new kitchen and living space. The applicant has confirmed that the intended occupation for the development is 6 people. However, some rooms could be, under the parameters of the licensing scheme, be occupied by 2 people. All room sizes accord with the standards as set out within the HMO licensing scheme, which is the relevant standard in this instance, including the required number of bathrooms and living space. The application has been brought to the Planning Committee because of the high amount of public interest. Key issues and objections arising from the public consultation include an over-concentration of HMOs within the area, poor living conditions by virtue of lack of adequate floor space and over-intensive occupation, loss of privacy arising from the addition of the rear dormer, and the likely increase of bins being left on the pavement, as well as the increase in parking pressures arising from the intensification of use. The Transport Development Management Department and Environmental Health Officer were consulted on this application, neither of which raised objections following the submission of additional information and some minor amendments. The HMO has been assessed against the SPD in terms of concentration. As the existing HMO is already licensed, there would be no increase in the concentration of HMOs, which would remain at 9.52%, which is below the 10% threshold. The HMO would not damage any existing C3 dwellings and in these terms is acceptable. The kitchen, bedrooms and total communal space meet the minimum space standards of the HMO licensing standards. All bedrooms have adequate levels of natural light and ventilation, and overall the property has good levels of light, outlook and ventilation. It is acknowledged that the development would result in an intensification of use and likely increase of noise arising from additional occupants. The licensing scheme of which the development would be subject to deals with the operation and management of HMOs in terms of excessive noise pollution and antisocial behaviour arising from residents. The Environmental Health Officer has raised no objection to the scheme subject to conditioning, which would require the submission of a relevant noise assessment and a subsequent schedule of mitigation measures. Given that the dormer and roof alterations are permitted development and therefore not requiring planning permission, the impact of these elements on neighbouring properties cannot be reasonably assessed within this application. The addition of the bifold doors to the basement to the rear elevation, hip to gable roof extension and rear dormer can be completed under permitted development. The addition of the refuse and recycling store would be acceptable and would have a negligible impact to the street scene. Transport Development Management made no objection to the revised scheme. TDM was satisfied on the receipt of a parking survey that there was an acceptable amount of parking space within 150 metres of the site to accommodate vehicles arising from the development's intensification. The development would provide 8 cycle parking spaces exceeding the minimum amount as required by policy. The waste and recycling storage would be acceptable. The development is acceptable in sustainability terms and would result in a 20% reduction in residual carbon dioxide emissions through the implementation of PV cells. The application is considered acceptable and is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the conditions set out within the body of the report.
Thank you. Questions, please? None? Okay, I'll start. 9.52 was the intensity densification. Do we look also at the applications for licenses that are in process? So, for instance, this is a common question that's more coming from a wider sort of interest. I know that if someone hasn't got an application approved, they haven't got an HMO there, definitely, but could there be a slew of applications in the pipeline that would suddenly push that to 15%? I know we can't consider that, but do you look at it?
So we don't hold that data within the planning department. The concentration in this case, I've reassessed today and put it through the system. So unless some come in overnight, we should be good in those terms.
Okay, right. That's kind of fair enough, isn't it, really? Because an application is approved, it's approved, or it isn't approved. It's just an application then, isn't it? Lisa.
Thanks. I just had a question around what counts as the locality when you're looking at the concentration within what kind of area does that cover?
So it's a 100-metre radius from the site and also for sandwiching just within the immediate area around the application site.
That's for the Article 4, is it? Or is it for just general, any measurement of density?
So we use the concentration with the radius is to essentially work out the 10%, and the Article 4 direction is a separate legislative.
But that requires that they come for the planning.
Sorry, yes, yeah. So normally.
No, I got it wrong, and you're right. Yeah, okay, excellent. So it's 100 metres. Was that right? Yes. They're always asking me in Avonmouth. So it's. Guy, did you have a question?
Apologies, it was just to confirm a couple of things. One in relation, actually, Chair, and apologies, I should have raised it at the time. In answer to one of the questions from Public Forum in relation to pending applications.
Yeah, but they may or may not happen. So, in a sense, The supplementary planning document looks at the number of people who have got a licence for an HMO.
Yes.
Pending applications may never happen.
Apologies. They may be turned down, but my understanding was that on the pinpoint system, pending includes renewals pending, and the 3-month period leading up to a renewal being granted. And I just wanted to confirm that in this case, in line with the guidance from the Planning Inspectorate, we've included unused but consented planning for HMOs, as well as, it looks like we have, I was just checking on pinpoint, but I just wanted to check that that had formed part of the search.
So, just to clarify, in terms of the policy, we should only take into account the ones that have already been consented. But because we knew that it was being asked and we looked into it, would it actually make a difference in this case? And hence, Finn has been very proactive and looked at, would it make a difference, and therefore has given you also in green here the concentration proposed. So basically, it's exactly the same in this case. Doesn't make any difference.
As a point of general, there is a discussion there to be had, isn't there? But we do have an SPD which lays out what we can and can't do. And it is worth beginning by reading the documentation we have and obviously working with that. Caroline.
Can I ask exactly what defines an HMO? Is there a minimum number of people that need to be living in the place?
So a C4 HMO would be between 3 and 6 people who are not related by family, and then anything above 6 people is classed as a sui generis HMO.
Okay, and do you need a licence for the C4?
Yes, all HMOs are licensable in Bristol. They all need a mandatory licence, which was brought in November.
Right, so we would know. It's not that there could be other HMOs around that are operating without a licence, or at least there shouldn't be.
Yeah, there shouldn't be.
There shouldn't be. There could be, but it would be legal. Okay, I think that's come to the end of it. We'll have our discussion now. First hand up, please. No? Okay. Does anyone wish to move the officer recommendation is to approve? Would anyone like to move that? I will move it then. Anyone like to second it? Councillor Pulteney would like to second it. Okay. So the officer recommendation is to approve this application. And the motion in front of us is to agree with that. So Councillor Bartle?
For.
For. Councillor Pulteney?
For.
Councillor Stone?
Reject.
Councillor McCowie?
For.
Councillor Badruddin? Councillor Gooch?
For.
Councillor Durston?
For.
Councillor Breckles?
For.
And I'm for. So that is unanimous, is it not? No?
No, so Lisa rejected.
Sorry, one abstention and however... Oh, objection, sorry. Oh, okay. One objection and everyone else is for. Steve, you can do the maths on that one, but that is approved by majority. We now move to 87 Wick Road, Bristol, BS4 4HE. And our public forum is Kevin Brennan. Mr. Brennan?
I note that this proposed HMO is within about 10 metres of 2 other HMOs, one at 92 Wick Road, 10 units, and 94 Wick Road, 3 units. I'm also concerned that it's the loss of a family home. Previous occupants were 2 adults and 2 children. We're now seeing an application that puts 9 adults and 6 bathrooms into a medium-sized mid-terraced house. I'm also concerned about the breach of the Party Wall Act 1996 and the breach of building control standards as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Some of those things wouldn't be planning matters, and the officer will probably take those up and clarify which are and which may be and which may not be. Thank you. Next person, Alan Bryan. No. Anonymous, Councillor Horchin.
Good evening, councillors. I'm here today. Normally, I would ask this committee to look at the planning permission and the matters arising, which is that the HMOs are rather dense in the area, and lots of my local residents from lots of different communications that I've had are worried about the density of HMOs and the growth of HMOs. It seems we're not in Article 4, but previously you said the whole of Bristol is in Article 4.
No, it's not.
Okay.
No,
So that's
it's under HMO licensing.
under HMO licenses, but this one is a bigger one. But on this one, I would implore you to defer this. I know that the behaviour of the applicant is not usually a planning material condition to the planning matter, but under this circumstances, it is so extreme. And I've been sitting on, as you know, I've been sitting on planning committees now for a number of years, and I've never seen anything quite this bad, where the police are even involved. There's been a lot of threats, calling through letterboxes, fires, all sorts of things that have been happening since then, plus the applicant, which they are allowed to do, they were building on the inside of the house, but now they're breaching the party wall. I've only heard about this yesterday, so I can't tell you the exact details of it. So I would really, really recommend that these are really serious offences, and people are scared and they're frightened. That's why we've had some anonymous speeches or statements. And I would really like you to defer this matter until either the police has been involved and there have been an investigation, and also investigation into some of the breaches of the party wall, which are not on the planning, by the way. I know that's usually something that's dealt with enforcement, but in this case, with one thing on top of another, it really does need to have a better investigation before we allow this person a planning permission. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. There's no planning enforcement case been raised here. It is a matter of civil law.
This only happened yesterday, so there hasn't been time.
I think over to Finn now to do the presentation. Thank you.
This application is for the change of use from a single dwelling, which is use class C3, to a 6-bedroom HMO for up to 9 occupants, use class sui generis, which is located at 87 Wick Road within the boundary of the Brislington East Ward. The site consists of a 2-storey mid-terrace dwelling currently in use as a dwelling house, with a front and rear garden with access via a service path to Manworthy Road. There's no planning history associated with this site. This is the rear of the property as well as the access path that I've mentioned. The application proposes a change of use to a large HMO with 6 bedrooms. This includes some minor works to the exterior and the implementation of a waste and recycling store to the principal elevation and the cycle store to the rear. The application is considered to accord with the local development plan, and there are no material considerations that suggest this application should not be approved. The development proposes alterations to create 6 bedrooms and associated bathrooms, kitchen and living space for occupants. The applicant has confirmed that the intended occupation for the development is 6 people. However, some rooms could, under the parameters of the licensing scheme, be occupied by 2. All room sizes accord with the standards set out within the HMO licensing scheme, which is the relevant standard, and include the required number of bathrooms and living space. This application has been brought before councillors for review due to a councillor call-in request and a high number of objections. 54 objections were received through 2 rounds of public consultation and objected to for reasons including the proliferation and over-concentration of HMOs within the area, the loss of a family-sized home in an area with a need for them, the undermining of community cohesion through the implementation of an additional HMO, poor living conditions by virtue of over-intensive occupation and a lack of adequate floor space, unacceptable conditions of noise pollution and social behaviour to neighbouring occupiers, an increase in parking pressure giving rise to detrimental conditions of highway safety, as well as inadequate cycle storage and access. The Transport Development Management Department and Environmental Health Officer were consulted on this application, neither of which raised substantive concerns or objections subject to revisions and conditions. The HMO SPD assessment has been carried out. and the development would result in a concentration of 4.44% and would not damage any existing C3 dwellings. In these terms, the HMO is acceptable. It should also be noted that in principal terms, the application dwelling could change its use from a C3, which is the dwelling house, to a small HMO without planning permission. The kitchen, bedrooms and total communal space meet the minimum space requirements of the HMO licensing standards. All bedrooms have adequate levels of natural light and ventilation, and the property as a whole has good levels of light, outlook and ventilation. The HMO SBD is a supporting document for the provisions of the adopted core policy DM2 and is therefore used as the assessment basis for HMO living standards, including minimum room sizes. The SBD states that the relevant room size standards are those applied by the council to the licensable HMO properties. Emerging policy H6, which is described in the report, should be given some weight, also notes the HMO licensing standards are the relevant standard for room sizes. The nationally described space standards do not apply to this application as it is not a new dwelling. It is acknowledged that the intensification of use would likely increase noise. The licensing scheme of which the development would be subject to deals with the operation and management of HMOs in terms of excessive noise pollution and antisocial behaviour. The Environmental Health Officer was consulted on this scheme and on receipt of additional information and a condition mitigating detrimental noise transmission did not object to the scheme. Conditioning is recommended that would require the implementation of an appropriate scheme of sound insulation between the HMO and adjacent properties and would be required to be installed prior to the occupation of development. The external changes proposed under the development would be minimal, however concerns have been raised that the waste and cycle store would have a detrimental impact to the character of the street scene. The addition of the refuse or recycling store to the principal elevation would be acceptable and is likely to have a negligible impact. The proposed changes to fenestration do not require planning permission as they are provisioned for by the General Permitted Development Order. Transport Development Management made no objection to the scheme subject to amendments which have either been received or are being dealt with through condition. The site is sustainably located with good public transport links and the opportunity for public transport. TDM assert that the development is not expected to generate car ownership of a level that would give rise to detrimental conditions of highway safety. The refuse and recycling and cycle stores are of adequate size for the required quantum of the development and are suitably located. The application is considered acceptable and is therefore recommended for approval subject to the conditions set out within the report.
Thank you. Just to clarify, this would need an HMO licence in order to operate, wouldn't it?
Yes.
So we are looking at what we can look at in planning terms. Whatever decision we make, I'm certainly happy to write to licensing and to clarify the conditions, what we meant by the decision we were making and our understanding of the challenges of the situation, but we're constrained obviously by what our material planning concerns are not. Jenny?
So I was looking at the overall space inside this proposal. Sorry, I'm a bit distracted by the fireworks. And I couldn't figure out exactly what they are, but I did a sort of back of the envelope. Do you have the exact number of the overall floor space?
Not the overall floor space, just the bedrooms.
No, the overall total floor space. So I calculated it at about 120. That was like from, just a ruler, basically. And when you were just doing your presentation, you were talking about not applying the standards that come up if you Google minimum floor space standards because it's not a new building. Is that the reason? I don't really understand why that policy wouldn't apply.
So with HMOs, this one is a change of use, so it doesn't count as a new dwelling. It's just a change of use in land use terms. So therefore, we apply the HMO licensing standards. So this is provision for under the SPD2, which is the relevant HMO SPD, which is then based on our core policy DM2. So essentially, we don't use the nationally described space standards for HMOs, we use the licensing standards.
Yes, but to me, it seems like it's an additive thing, right? It's like that it should meet both standards, and our standards don't talk about the overall space. It just says this bedroom has to be this bedroom has to be this bedroom has to be this. But it doesn't talk about the total floor space, and I think that the total floor space is kind of limited. I think I would like to. I really don't understand why I can't apply that standard. So you're saying that because
our policies you've got to apply. That is why you can't apply something that's not our policy.
The policy, well, no, the point, I mean, it's national planning policy, so...
It's not actually, that's the...
Well, okay. Maybe I'm...
Have a go
Simone will clarify.
Sorry, this is just because I want to make absolutely clear, because I'm not very happy with the size of the...
The building exists, right? And therefore the national space standards don't apply because the building already exists. And because our policy is that for HMO applications, we use the licensing standards to judge whether what's being proposed is adequate or not. And the licensing standards only ask or go by bedrooms, so that I think it's a single bedroom has to be 6.5 square meters and a double bedroom 10 something. Yeah, and there's also a minimum that the living room has to be, but there's no minimum for the overall amount of space. So we can only apply what's in the policy.
Thank you. Next person, Caroline, and then Guy.
Yeah, so this goes back to my question about the HMO. So I think I was getting mixed up between HMO licensing and planning permission. So he wouldn't need planning permission if it was smaller. So if he had less than 6 people in it, he wouldn't need planning. Okay. So is this why it was suggested that he went for the 9, because it's the only way that we'd actually get to do the planning permission?
So if the applicant had decided that they only wanted a maximum of 6 people, which is what they're intending, they could have done it without planning permission and just registering for licensing. But because some of the bedrooms could have up to 2 people through the licensing standards, it's appropriate in this case to treat it as a sui generis, as a large HMO.
Right. Okay, and I've got one more question, which is, why is diagonally opposite not opposite? This is the sandwiching question.
Yes, because it's separated by, the road that goes in between them is counted as a separating road, so it just doesn't count as opposite. It has to be directly opposite in order to sandwich a C3 dwelling.
Right, but it would be sandwiching even if they're on the same side. It would be sandwiching even if there were 3 houses between 2 HMOs, yes? So arguably that road is less than 3 houses, or less than 2 other houses. So it ought to count as sandwiching because it is very close.
But there isn't anything on the other side. You know, even if we counted the corner, there isn't anything then on the other side that would sandwich it with it.
There is, because we're not talking about the house on the corner on this one. The property is the one in from the corner. The house that's on the corner is going to have the HMO to one side and a huge HMO diagonally opposite him.
But because there's a separating road between them, the SBD essentially says that doesn't count as sandwiching. So that road that runs between them separates them. So we can't count it as sandwiching within that assessment.
Okay. Any further? Councillor Bartley, you have a question?
Yeah, so Katja was talking about deferral. We should probably talk about it. I didn't understand whether we would have any reasons any planning reasons to defer. Does
Well,
anyone have any?
If you're going to defer, that's because you have planning reasons to defer.
Yeah.
Do you have planning reasons to defer?
Well, yeah, so my question is, does anyone have any? Because I don't, I mean,
Well,
I don't
you
have
can't
any.
start by wanting to defer and then ask what
No,
reasons
no,
there
I
are
was
for taking the
asking
course.
what
That is
kinds
completely...
of, on what basis might one defer something like this? Like,
I'm sorry, that's
no.
an inappropriate question.
It's too broad, okay.
It's
Cool.
an inappropriate question.
Okay.
If anyone wishes to respond to that and has particular reasons, planning terms, why this should be deferred, then you may state those in the discussion now, but you may not ask officers how we could defer this. Because Finn has already stated that in planning terms, this is good. Because of the nature of planning, it doesn't cover every activity in life and law, unfortunately, or fortunately. Guy?
Thank you. The references in the SPD to harmful concentration is principally concerned with protecting residential amenity. Is that right in terms of things like noise pollution, that sort of thing?
Yes.
Yes, there's other elements as well, such as parking pressures, as well as lack of community cohesion. There's a number of things that essentially that concentration limit is attempting to essentially prevent from no concentration.
So considering the intention of the policy, what I'm wondering is, given that the reason, if you look at the density of HMOs in the sort of surrounding area, the reason I suspect that this doesn't meet the threshold test is because of the school, right?
It's
school opposite.
Finn has said it's about 3.7 out of 10.
I'm just looking. Apologies, but when you bring the site itself up on the Pinpoint Plus system, I'm looking, for example, at Ward BDY boundary. I'm guessing. Apologies. Crossing straight over opposite the 87, we're talking about there's Holymead Primary School directly opposite. Is that right?
Yes, there is indeed.
And then the 4 properties that abut the primary school to the north of the 5, 4 are already HMOs. Is that right? And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the properties behind the school are HMOs. And then of the road abutting the school to the south, 3 of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units are HMOs. In fact, that strikes me as being an astonishing number of HMOs in concentration, were it not for the fact that there's the school. And I have to admit, given what we've said about the use of the SPD to protect the immunity of local residents in terms of things like parking and noise, that just because the parking and noise isn't created by more HMOs doesn't mean that they're absent. And they may, in other words, that concentration could be caused by a combination of HMOs and a school. I would invite officer comment as to whether that's something that we could take into account in light, not necessarily the SPD, but those bits of our policy intended to protect residential amenity more broadly.
So the function of the SPD is essentially to build onto the adopted core policy, which in this case would be DM2. So the council and the planning department has worked to establish these forms of assessment, and in this case it would be the concentration within 100 metres. So that's an objective assessment that would be applied to any site. So in these terms, the SPD has essentially already carried out the function of our core policies in this instance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would say as well. 100 metre is 100 metre, whether there's a school within it or not. And so we need to look at the concentration within 100 metre, and that's well below 10%. I'm looking at slide 9 where that's set out.
Guy?
Apologies, I just want to absolutely confirm again, apologies, appreciating I asked this question in relation to the previous application, that number includes both, so it includes HMO licences in being, HMO renewals in process, and properties with planning consents on them for use as HMOs.
Yes, that includes all licensed HMOs, and you can see on here the blue dots are pending licenses, which are included in the statistics.
Can I just add as well, or just remind members what Finn has also explained, that we cannot prevent here a HMO being established because small HMOs are already permitted development because it's outside an Article 4 area. The only thing that could potentially be prevented would be the increase to a large HMO. And maybe just as well to throw in one other thing, where we've been particularly unsuccessful in defending HMO appeals was in this situation. It was in this situation of increases from, where an increase was sought from a small, where we refused the increase from a small to a large HMO.
Caroline?
Yeah, I've just got one more question. It's about the noise. So obviously the noise officer had reservations and then said as long as they do the assessments and they put in the insulation. But obviously to do the assessments, they'll need to gain access to the next door neighbour's house who has objected. So it does say that in the report. So what if he doesn't give them access? Does that mean that the noise mitigating effects just won't happen?
Essentially, so the development wouldn't be able to be occupied until those noise assessments and mitigation schemes are carried out in full. So essentially, whether or not access is afforded wouldn't be a planning consideration in this instance.
But we would hope that the local planning authority would work with licensing to make sure that there was no gap between one function and the other function.
Oh, so that's a licensing thing, not a planning thing?
Well, the suitability, obviously, of the landlord and the suitability of the whole setup is very much a licensing thing. That's what the licensing is for.
Yeah, okay.
So,
okay.
We have different instruments. They are two separate regimes. People know each other, operate them, and have each other's documents. But the danger is we try to use this regime to implement things which should be implemented in another regime.
So why was that all in this report then? Because it was going on about the 3 new bathrooms against the neighbouring wall.
Well, there are soundproofing issues, environmental issues. So as I say, there is a crossover. There is a slight crossover. I would hope that we would make sure on the ground that crossover, people work together to ensure that planning. I'm not sure. Sin is not going to go out personally in 6 months' time and check that those boards are in place. But should licensing find that they weren't in place, I hope they would come back to the local planning authority and say, actually, this is not a suitable person. He hasn't fulfilled all the conditions of the planning application yet even.
Yeah, if the conditions weren't fulfilled, then an enforcement case could be opened onto the property, essentially.
Mm. And one would hope that licensing would do that as a start before they considered other aspects of the potential landlord's behaviour or other things that have gone on, which is their function. Do we have any discussion we'd like to have? Fabian?
Yeah, it's one of those things. I don't actually think there are any grounds to not grant it, whatever we think of the size of the rooms or anything or whatever we, I think, licensing has a function that it will fulfill. We're simply dealing with the actual physical alterations to a building or not. Given the threshold is as low as it is in the area, whatever we think of the way the calculations have been done, seems a bit creepy having all loads of HMOs around a primary school, but it's the threshold. Could I have that slide back up? It's about 3% or 4%. That's it. So acceptable threshold 10%, concentration, if this what were to happen, which would mean it needs to be licensed as well as have the planning permission, concentration would be 4.44%. We can't, we would struggle. You don't need planning permission to open a small HMO. We would really, really struggle to defend an appeal on this. So whatever we think, I think we're cornered with the existing policies we've got. We're cornered, and we can't really find grounds to refuse. So I'll have to accept it.
Thank you. Any further comments, Guy?
Just going to clarify how many objections there have been from neighbours, because it looked like a lot, as well as the 2 ward councillors. And an awful lot of them seem to focus on noise.
There were 54 in total.
Okay. How many dwellings would have been encompassed in the consultation, the neighbour consultation?
I think 41 properties were consulted.
41 properties consulted and 54 public objections.
Some of those are repeat objections as well. So the same person commenting more than once.
Fair enough. That does seem like a high number. And given DM2 is quite explicit, HMO shall not be permitted where the development would harm residential amenity of the locality. That I'm going to take that as evidence that it would harm amenity in the locality. Now, that's not a reason to say let's reject this out of hand yet, nor would our protocol allow us to, or at least it would strongly advise us not to. So for what it's worth, obviously the chair will move the officer's recommendation. If that falls, I think I would probably propose and would welcome a second, if that scenario were to come about, that we defer the decision pending further evidence around noise and the other harms to residential amenity within the high volume of public forum that we've seen for this application. I hope that seems like a reasonable approach, but obviously the officer recommendation may sail through, so let's see.
Is it not better to push this potential landlord down the road of the licensing regime as quickly as possible in order that one can, otherwise he may just carry on doing what he's doing until we assess this in another 4 or 5 months' time?
If I may, Chair, my own ward followed that advice right up until the point that residential amenity was diminished to the point people started leaving in droves. It's genuinely become challenging. It's quite rare you find people in Cottingham who haven't described a situation where they haven't had to move because of the loss of residential amenity caused by the massive over-concentration of HMOs on some streets in that ward. There are areas, thinking particularly the area around Chandos Road, Ravenswood Road, Waverley and Meridian, where you have such a concentration of HMOs that every single night you just get that constant bass sound, because every night is someone's birthday where the rubbish
you're getting
is regularly
old,
piling
you're
up in the
getting
street.
old, councillor.
If it's any consolation,
you
Chair,
know.
I'm not going to rely on the licensing regime to fix it.
Right. Well, I'd say an expression of confidence on the council's own licensing regime there. Anybody else got any comments? Councillor Gooch.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Guy. I do think, given all the objections, that it does have an impact on local amenity. So I'll be voting against it, I think.
Anybody else? No. Lisa?
Sorry, yeah, I'm still a bit torn on whether we can actually defer this based on actual material planning considerations. So I'm sort of wavering.
I think we would have to, given that our definition of local amenity is the number of HMOs within 100 metres, and it doesn't, it being 10, and it doesn't meet that. That is our stated definition of it, as has been made clear by Finn and Simone. And we're now saying that we wish to revise our own planning documents in order to make a decision. That's what we're saying, Guy. No, it is exactly what we're saying. Carry on. Explain to me why I'm wrong.
It's solely that residential amenity can be affected by factors other than HMOs. So, for example, you were sandwiched in between a refuse collection facility and another large, like a nightclub. That would affect your residential amenity. It would have nothing to do with the number of HMOs. In this case, we have a policy on HMOs that reflects the effects HMOs can have in harmful concentration on residential amenity. That's not to say that can't be a cumulative effect with another harmful effect on residential amenity. What I'm saying in this case is a huge number of the neighbours are saying this will worsen the effect on residential amenity in this area. I'm proposing, I may be proposing, that we defer to have a better look at what those are in addition to the HMOs. I agree, this does not trigger the HMO SPD policy. What I want to know is there a cumulative harm being felt by the residents in this area beyond that? And let's bend over backwards to not reject this application out of hand now, which is not what I'm proposing. I just want to see if there's evidence that can be collected to back up what the residents are saying in public forum. I don't think that's unreasonable.
Okay, so what I will do is I will propose the officer recommendation. If that falls, then I suggest you propose a deferral just so that we may take more time to consider this. I'm not sure what kind of report, supplementary report, Finn would be able to bring in the next few months, given the amount of papers he's already produced for this. But if you feel that would be helpful, then I would go with that, and I would hope that whatever we decide is helpful to the neighbours down there, because that's ultimately what we would like to do, I'm sure. So, Fabian.
Just quickly, I know before we go down this path, are there any areas where we could actually, if we defer, reasonably get more evidence one way or the other to help us actually make a decision that is sound?
What, in planning terms?
Yeah, in planning terms. That's what this is. This is planning.
I think the one area where I've heard where you've asked us to see whether we could obtain more information is with regards to noise. I'm very sceptical that we can get more. The environmental health officer has already looked at it, has commented, has said he's satisfied that the amount of noise that's being raised can be mitigated through noise attenuation and that it can be conditioned. So I'm not sure how much more we are able to get on this.
I mean, what it wants is for the planning conditions to be made and then for them to be implemented. That's what the environmental officer has recommended as a solution to the noise. Yes, Karen.
I thinking about it. I'd prefer that we do go through the planning rather than do not, and he just goes ahead with it anyway, and just has, of course, the HMO license. But I am really concerned about this chap who lives next door, who has got this one side of him and a whole row of them diagonally opposite. So
I feel that licensing would be probably more able to be proactive in terms of following up an HMO that was operating without permission. It's probably more difficult in terms of planning enforcement regime to pin something down. That is my feeling. So, Guy, you wish to say something?
Wouldn't wish to delay the moving of the officer's recommendation, Chair.
Okay. I will move the officer recommendation, which is to approve this. I will certainly work with a local councillor to explain the meaning of the recommendation to the councillor's licensing function. That's my role as chair, I feel, to do that. Should we decide to approve this, I would do that. Does anyone agree with me on that? I will go around. Councillor Bartle? Yes. I don't have a second. Would you like to second it? No. Anyone like to second it? Nobody wants to second it. Okay, another proposal then.
Propose we defer on the basis of policy DM2 and DM35 to give officers more time to work with the developer to assuage our concerns in respect of noise. That could be through the provision of additional noise mitigations under policy DM30. Equally, it will...
What? Sorry? You lost me from the beginning there. Yeah. You... I don't know what you're talking about. Sorry.
I'm proposing deferring on the basis of policy DM30, which concerns alterations to existing buildings and the safeguarding of the amenity of neighbouring occupiers. Policy DM2 of the Site Allocations Development Management Policy Plan, which notes that HMO shall not be permitted where the development would harm a residential amenity of the locality as a result of levels of activities that would cause excessive noise and disturbance. Deferring in this way should give officers time to work with the developer to see if there are any noise mitigations that could assuage the concerns of the committee, and also time to elucidate the evidence provided in public forum by nearby residents that noise in the area is already harming, and this development will create additional harm to residential amenity in the area. I hope that's clear.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, that's what the conditions are. That's essentially what approval would do, because it would ask officers to go away and work with them to put conditions on to mitigate the noise. But, okay. So, we'd like to defer on the... Are you happy with that? Can we work with that? Great. Okay, thank you. We'll work with that. So, seconder for that, please. Councillor Bartle, would you like to second? Okay, Councillor Gooch, would like to second. I'll support that. Councillor Bartle, you'll support that?
Yeah.
Councillor Portley, obviously.
4.
Councillor Stone.
4.
Councillor Cowie.
4.
4.
4. 4.
4.
So we have unanimous support for that. And thank you to all officers, those who are still here and those who've gone. And thank you for members of the public who still have stuck through to the bitter end. Great. Thank you. Good night, everyone.